As the night settles in, so can you. Let us know in the comments, where are you listening this and what is your current time. After that, close your eyes if you like. Nothing we're about to discuss is urgent or even particularly interesting. And let us begin. Before Venice became the city of gondolas and overpriced gelato, it was something quite different. A soddy collection of islands inhabited by people who might have had webbed feet if evolution had a sense of humour. But don't let the swampy beginnings fool you. These lagoon dwellers were on their way to becoming maritime moguls. Let's dive into the murky waters of their rise to power, where the strategic location was worth its weight in gold or salt, since that was also a big deal back then. Start with the basics. Venice wasn't always the poster child for romantic escapades it is today. Nope, back in the day, it was more like a medieval version of Survivor, where the main challenge was figuring out how to live on a glorified mudflat without sinking. Around the 5th century, as the Roman Empire was doing its best impression of a failing startup, folks from the mainland were looking for a place to dodge the waves of invaders crashing down on Italy. Enter the Venetian lagoon, a spot so marshy and mosquito-ridden that even the most determined barbarians thought twice about venturing in. Like an ancient witness protection program, the lagoon offered safety through obscurity. The people who braved this watery frontier were nothing if not innovative. They drove wooden stakes into the mud to create stable ground, a bit like building your house on Jenga blocks and praying for the best. And yet, against all odds, this precarious setup worked. By the 9th century, Venice had transformed from a refuge into a bustling trade hub, leveraging its enviable location at the crossroads of Byzantine and Western trade routes. It wasn't just luck, though. The Venetians were shrewd, and more importantly, they understood the value of their position like a realtor with a monopoly on beachfront property. Speaking of trade, let's talk salt. Today, it's something you sprinkle on fries, but back then it was the cornerstone of any self-respecting economy. Venice capitalized on its salt marshes, using them to bankroll its rise. By controlling the salt trade, Venice ensured it had the financial clout needed to expand its influence. And expand it did, like an empire-building game, where the objective was to outmaneuver your neighbors while keeping your feet dry. Venice's rise wasn't just a story of trading goods, it was also about trading influence. The city developed a knack for playing larger powers against each other, aligning with the Byzantines one moment and the Holy Roman Empire the next, always ensuring it came out on top. It was like a medieval version of Game of Thrones, but with fewer dragons and more haggling over spices. The Venetian arsenal, founded in the late 12th century, was a game-changer. Imagine an industrial complex so advanced that it could churn out warships at an alarming rate, making Venice the medieval equivalent of a naval powerhouse. At its peak, the arsenal employed around 16,000 people, proving that Venice was not just about pretty canals and masked balls, but also about serious maritime muscle. It was here that Venice built its fleet, ensuring it could protect its trade routes and assert its dominance over the Adriatic Sea. While Venice was busy turning itself into a maritime superpower, it was also crafting a political system that was as unique as its geography. The city was a republic led by the Doge, an elected leader who was more figurehead than autocrat. The real power lay with the Great Council, a body of noble families who decided everything from foreign policy to whether they should raise taxes on fish. This system gave Venice a level of stability and continuity that was rare in a time when most rulers had the lifespan of a snowman in a sauna. Venice's political savvy was matched only by its ability to mythologize itself. The city claimed its origins lay in the divine, supposedly founded on March 25, 421 AD, at noon, because why not be precise when you're making stuff up? This self-created origin story served as a PR masterstroke, lending an air of legitimacy and destiny to a place that started as a refugee camp on stilts. And yet, for all its myth-making, the reality was that Venice's rise was due to strategic brilliance and a willingness to exploit every advantage. Its leaders were adept at navigating the murky waters of diplomacy and trade, ensuring that Venice not only survived, but thrived. They turned their lagoon into a fortress, their city into a hub of commerce, and their fleet into a force to be reckoned with. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for an empire that would outlast many of its more landlocked counterparts. So, next time you're sipping an overpriced cappuccino in St. Mark's Square, Remember, Venice wasn't built on romance alone. It was built on wood, salt, and a healthy dose of cunning. From its swampy beginnings, Venice rose to become the master of the seas, proving that sometimes the best way to rise is to start in the mud. From wood and salt to silk and spice, Venice knew how to diversify its portfolio like a medieval Warren Buffett. As the city sailed into its golden age, trade routes became its veins, pumping wealth and exotic goods into its heart. We're talking about a time when a bolt of silk was worth its weight in gold, and spices could make or break fortunes. Venice wasn't just a trade hub. It was the Amazon Prime of the medieval world, delivering luxury goods faster than you could say Marco Polo. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Venice's trade empire was anchored in the Mediterranean, but its reach extended far beyond. By the 13th century, Venetian merchants were regular fixtures in the spice markets of Alexandria, the bustling bazaars of Constantinople, and even the distant cities of the Silk Road. They brought back pepper, cinnamon, and ginger spices that were as prized as today's most exclusive gadgets. In fact, pepper was so valuable that it was often used as currency. Imagine paying your rent with a handful of peppercorns. Talk about seasoning your life with a little luxury. But it wasn't just about the spices. Venetian ships also returned laden with silk from China, cotton from Egypt, and precious metals from the Middle East. The numbers were staggering. In just 1 year, Venetian merchants might move thousands of tons of goods, making the city a bustling hive of commercial activity. And all this trade wasn't just about hoarding wealth, it was about transforming it into power. The money from these ventures funded everything from public buildings to military campaigns, reinforcing Venice's status as a maritime juggernaut. Now, let's not pretend this mercantile marvel was all smooth sailing. Venice had rivals, and plenty of them. Genoa, Pisa, and other Italian city-states eyed Venice's wealth like a cat eyes a canary. They wanted a slice of that sweet, lucrative pie, and they weren't above using some old-fashioned skullduggery to get it. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were high. Alliances shifted like sand in the desert, and today's friend could be tomorrow's foe. It was like a never-ending game of chess, with each city-state trying to outmaneuver the others. Venice, however, had a knack for staying one step ahead. It wasn't just through superior trading prowess, but also through a deft hand in diplomacy, and, when necessary, a well-placed bribe. The Venetians had mastered the art of the payoff, greasing the right palms to keep trade routes open and rivals at bay. In a world where loyalty was as fleeting as a summer romance, Venice ensured it was always the belle of the ball, wooing allies with promises of wealth and protection. One of the most audacious diplomatic moves was the Fourth Crusade. Originally intended to reclaim Jerusalem, it ended up with Venetian ships ferrying crusaders to Constantinople instead. The Venetians had their eyes on lucrative trade concessions, and by redirecting the crusaders, they secured a foothold in the heart of the Byzantine Empire. It was a strategic coup that expanded their influence and lined their coffers. Talk about turning a religious fervor into a business opportunity. Venice could teach a masterclass in opportunism. While all this swashbuckling trade and diplomacy was happening, back home, Venice was a hive of innovation. The Rialto market buzzed with activity as merchants haggled over prices and discussed the latest market trends. The Venetian ducat, a gold coin minted since the 13th century, became the currency of choice across Europe, a testament to the city's economic clout. The Great Council implemented policies that ensured Venice's merchants had the upper hand, crafting trade agreements that favoured Venetian interests and kept competitors at arm's length. But don't be fooled into thinking Venice's success was all about smart deals and savvy trading. The city had more than its fair share of luck, too. Its geographical position was a godsend, nestled conveniently between east and west. While other cities squabbled over land routes, Venice leveraged its maritime prowess, turning the Mediterranean into its personal highway. It was like having a fast pass to the riches of the world while everyone else was stuck in traffic. Yet, for all its achievements, Venice wasn't immune to the darker side of power. The pursuit of wealth and influence sometimes led to actions that were less than noble. The Venetian government was notorious for its secretive machinations, and the infamous Council of Ten ensured that dissent was swiftly silenced. Spies and informers lurked around every corner, and those who dared to challenge the status quo often found themselves on the wrong end of a dagger or exiled to the far reaches of the empire. As the city expanded its dominion across the Mediterranean, Venice's leaders understood that maintaining their empire required more than just naval strength. They developed a sophisticated intelligence network, ensuring they were always a step ahead of their adversaries. Knowledge was power, and Venice wielded it like a finely honed blade, cutting through the fog of war and diplomacy with precision. This relentless pursuit of dominance was both Venice's greatest strength and its Achilles heel. As the city continued to grow, so too did the complexity of managing its vast empire. Balancing the demands of trade, diplomacy, and military might was a high-wire act, and any misstep could send the city tumbling into chaos. But for the time being, Venice was on top, a shimmering jewel in the crown of the Mediterranean, its wealth and influence unmatched by any other city-state. So, as you wander the cobblestone streets of modern Venice, remember that beneath the romance and beauty lies a history of ambition, cunning, and an unyielding drive to rule the waves. Venice wasn't just a city. It was an empire, born from the mud and risen to greatness through sheer audacity and a bit of well-placed bribery. And while the gondolas may glide gently through its canals today, they do so on waters once roiled by the currents of history, propelled by the relentless winds of commerce and conquest. And while those gondolas glide as smoothly as a politician dodging a tough question, beneath their polished allure lies a city that's anything but serene. Welcome to a Venice where gondoliers weren't just floating serenaders, but the ultimate multitaskers of their day. They were the Uber drivers of the canals, minus the GPS, but with the added bonus of a quick-witted commentary on the side. Forget the image of gently punting lovers through quiet waters. These guys were navigating a chaotic, bustling, aquatic highway with all the grace and urgency of a New York City cabbie during rush hour. Ah, Venice, the city of masks and masquerades, where even the social hierarchy was a carefully orchestrated dance. At the top of this glamorous pyramid sat the Doge, Venice's version of a monarch, but with a lot more paperwork and a lot less power. Elected for life, the Doge was more figurehead than dictator, a sort of ceremonial master of ceremonies amidst the city's political circus. Imagine being the CEO of a billion-dollar company but needing board approval to even order office supplies. That's the Doge's life in a nutshell. Our Doges were not the autocrats of your typical medieval kingdom. Their palatial residence, the Doge's palace, was more of a grandiose office space where they dealt with the city's elite, the Great Council. This council was a who's who of Venetian nobility, a collection of noble families who wielded the real power, deciding everything from state matters to whether the city should invest in more gondolas or just stick with importing more silk. Think of it as a medieval board of directors, but with more intrigue and less transparency. The Venetian nobility had a knack for balancing opulence with a paranoid streak that would make even the most conspiracy-obsessed Redditor blush. This was a city that thrived on secrecy and suspicion, where the infamous Council of Ten operated like a shadowy intelligence agency, ensuring the status quo remained unchallenged. This council could spy on anyone and everyone, supposedly for the greater good, though, let's be honest, it was mostly for their own good. Dissent was not so much discouraged as it was swiftly silenced, and those who dared to question the powers that be often found themselves taking an extended, one-way vacation to a remote corner of the Venetian Empire. Yet, for all this cloak-and-dagger business, Venice was a place of remarkable social mobility, if you knew how to play your cards right. The city embraced commerce like a long-lost relative, and wealth was the great equalizer. Merchants who struck it rich could buy their way into the elite circles, attending the same opulent parties and perhaps even marrying into noble families. It was an early lesson in networking and social climbing, proving that sometimes the quickest way to the top is through the pocketbook. The city itself was a patchwork of bustling markets and crowded neighborhoods where the air was thick with the scent of spices, salt, and the occasional whiff of less pleasant things from the canals. Life in Venice was anything but serene. It was vibrant and chaotic, a cacophony of trade and commerce that never seemed to sleep. The Rialto market was the beating heart of this whirlwind, a place where you could buy anything from a bolt of the finest silk to a handful of exotic peppercorns, all while dodging pickpockets and haggling with vendors. Let's not forget the artisans, those unsung heroes who crafted everything from delicate glassware to intricate masks. These skilled workers were the backbone of Venice's economy, producing goods that were coveted far and wide. Murano glass, in particular, was the iPhone of its day. Everyone wanted it, and only Venice had it. The glassmakers of Murano were so valuable that they were forbidden to leave the island, lest they take their trade secrets with them. It was an early form of intellectual property protection, Venetian style. Of course, not everyone was living the high life. The class divide in Venice was as wide as the Grand Canal, with the labouring classes doing the heavy lifting, quite literally, to keep the city running. These workers were the engine of Venice's prosperity, from the dockhands loading and unloading ships to the builders who kept the city's precarious structures from sinking into the lagoon. Their lives were a far cry from the luxury of the nobility, often spent in cramped quarters and with little in the way of security. Yet their labour was indispensable, and in that necessity lay a form of unspoken power. As for Venice's women, they too played a crucial role in the city's dynamics, often behind the scenes, but no less important. Noble women might have been restricted by societal norms, but they wielded influence through marriage alliances and the subtle art of persuasion. Meanwhile, women in the lower classes worked alongside men in the markets or as artisans, contributing to the city's economy and ensuring their family's survival in the process. It was a society where roles were clearly defined, yet those who could find a way to navigate its complexities often found room to thrive. In the midst of all this, the city's leaders had to contend with an ever-present sense of paranoia. Venice was a republic surrounded by kingdoms and empires, and its leaders were acutely aware of the dangers lurking beyond the lagoon. This paranoia seeped into every aspect of Venetian life, from the secretive machinations of the Council of Ten to the constant vigilance against spies and traitors. It was a city that could never rest easy, always looking over its shoulder while projecting an image of serene confidence to the outside world. And so, the stage was set for Venice to continue its dance on the world stage, a dance of power, commerce, and caution that would see it through the centuries. As the city navigated its way through the turbulent waters of history, it would need every ounce of cunning, every bit of charm, and perhaps a dash of luck to maintain its place in the sun. But for now, Venice stood as a beacon of what human ambition could achieve, a testament to the power of trade, strategy, and a little bit of well-placed paranoia. And so Venice stood there, a shimmering beacon of what human ambition could achieve, a testament to the power of trade, strategy, and a little bit of well-placed paranoia. But, like all good things, Venice's golden age was not to last forever. As the 15th century rolled in, the city that had once been the master of its destiny began to feel the uncomfortable pinch of external pressures and internal blunders. This wasn't just a hiccup. It was the kind of existential crisis that could make even the most seasoned therapist throw up their hands. Let's start with the external pressures. The Ottomans were breathing down Venice's neck like a particularly persistent telemarketer. By the mid-15th century, they had wrested control of Constantinople from the Byzantines in 1453, a move that sent shockwaves through all of Europe and caused Venice to break out in a cold sweat. Losing Constantinople was like losing the Wi-Fi password at a tech conference. Catastrophic. It was a critical juncture in their trade network, and its loss meant a significant dent in Venice's ability to control the lucrative eastern trade routes. The response from Venice was a blend of desperation and innovation, like trying to fix a leaky boat with duct tape. They attempted to negotiate new trade deals and find alternative routes. But let's face it, trying to outmaneuver the Ottomans was akin to playing chess with a grandmaster who just happens to have a bazooka under the table. The Ottomans weren't just formidable opponents, they were the new big kids on the block, and they were ready to play hardball. Meanwhile, the discovery of the New World by Columbus in 1492, a feat sponsored by Spain, of all countries, opened up a new realm of trade possibilities that Venice wasn't quite prepared to tap into. Instead of embracing this brave new world, Venice clung to its old roots like a dog with a particularly tasty bone. They were slow to adapt, a bit like that one friend who still insists on using a flip phone in 2023 out of sheer stubbornness. Internally, Venice wasn't doing itself any favours either. The city was like a gorgeous house with a termite problem, beautiful on the outside, but crumbling on the inside. The political system, which had once guaranteed stability, was becoming as inflexible as a 2-day-old baguette. The Great Council, That illustrious assembly of noble families had become a closed shop. Only those born into the right families could join, a policy that made about as much sense as putting a screen door on a submarine. By 5006, the council had 2,500 members, but it was growing increasingly insular, more interested in preserving the status quo than steering Venice toward a prosperous future. Then there was the matter of Venice's military might, or lack thereof. The Venetian arsenal, once the envy of the medieval world, was starting to show its age. By the 16th century, Venice's naval forces were struggling to keep up with the technological advancements of their rivals. The world had moved on to bigger and better ships, but Venice was still stuck in the past, like a once great rock band stubbornly playing the hits even as the crowd clamoured for something new. And if that wasn't enough to keep the Doge up at night, the Italian Wars 1494 to 559 certainly did. Venice found itself embroiled in a series of conflicts that were less about noble causes and more about which European power could outmaneuver the others for dominance. It was a brutal game of whack-a-mole, with alliances shifting like quicksand and Venice caught in the middle, desperately trying to keep its head above water. But perhaps the most damning blow to Venice's empire was its own hubris. The city had grown complacent, basking in the glow of past achievements, while ignoring the signs of impending trouble. It was like watching a star athlete who, after years of success, decides that training is optional and that the competition will simply roll over. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Let's talk economic costs because here's where it really hurts. By the late 16th century, Venice's coffers were starting to run dry. The endless wars, coupled with the declining trade revenues, were draining the treasury faster than you can say economic downturn. And while Venice had always been adept at leveraging its wealth for power, it now found itself having to borrow money to finance its military campaigns. In 1537, Venice entered the War of the League of Cognac against the Habsburgs, a conflict that further depleted its finances and left the city in a precarious position. And yet, for all its challenges, Venice refused to go quietly into the night. In true Venetian fashion, the city doubled down on what it did best, trade and diplomacy. It sought to strengthen its ties with other European powers, hoping to secure new alliances that would help offset the loss of its eastern trade. But the days of Venice calling the shots were over. The city was now just one player among many in a crowded and competitive European landscape. So, where does all this leave our once mighty empire? Venice, for all its brilliance and beauty, was learning a harsh lesson in the perils of complacency. The city that had once been the jewel of the Mediterranean was now fighting for its survival, caught in a web of external threats and internal decay. But even as its power waned, the spirit of Venice remained unbroken. It was a city that had risen from the mud after all, and if there was one thing Venice knew how to do, it was adapt. As the sun set on Venice's golden age, the city faced the future with a mix of determination and desperation, clinging to its legacy while searching for a path forward in an ever-changing world. And while the gondolas still glided through its canals, they did so under the shadow of a fading empire, their gentle ripples echoing the tumultuous history of a city that had once ruled the waves. Yet, even as the sun cast long shadows over Venice's fading empire, its unique charm refused to dim. What, you might ask, turned this maritime powerhouse into today's tourist mecca? A place where gondoliers sing to selfie-stick-wielding travellers, while the ghosts of merchant princes whisper through the canals. Well, the transformation from empire to attraction is a story of both strategic reinvention and inevitable nostalgia. First, let's tackle the myth of Venice as a purely romantic getaway. Sure, Venice's winding canals and Gothic architecture paint a picture that belongs on the cover of a romance novel. But much of this allure is carefully curated. After all, the city didn't survive on charm alone. Back when Venice was still a geopolitical heavyweight, its architectural wonders and cultural patronage were less about aesthetic pleasure and more about flexing some serious financial muscle. The Basilica di San Marco, with its opulent mosaics, wasn't just a house of worship, it was a statement, a look at what our trade routes bought kind of brag. Fast forward to the 18th century, and Venice was shedding its empire's skin like a molting snake, reinventing itself as a cultural and artistic hub. It was here that Venice really understood the power of branding, centuries before marketing maestros turned it into a science. The city embraced the arts, becoming a magnet for painters like Canaletto and composers like Vivaldi. The Venice Carnival, with its elaborate masks and opulent balls, became the stuff of legends, a perfectly staged distraction from the fact that the city's political influence was going the way of the dodo. Enter the 19th century, and Venice had mastered the art of the pivot. As Napoleon's forces marched in with the subtlety of an elephant in a china shop in 1797, the city was forced to adapt. Again. The French, followed by the Austrians, left their mark, but Venice's ability to attract and dazzle remained undiminished. By the time the 20th century rolled around, Venice was perfecting its new role as a tourist haven. It became the stage for the Venice Biennale, founded in 1895, an international art exhibition that drew the eyes of the world. The city embraced its reputation as a living museum, where history wasn't just preserved, it was packaged and sold, sometimes with a side of gelato. But why do tourists flock to this once mighty empire's remnants? Let's be honest, it's the allure of the past, the romanticized version of history that glosses over the gritty details. Today's visitors might stroll through St. Stroll, Mark Square, blissfully unaware that this iconic piazza was once a bustling marketplace where merchants haggled over spices and silk, and the air was thick with the scent of commerce and ambition. And here's a kicker: Venice's very survival as a tourist hub is a testament to its history of adaptation. Its lagoon setting, once a strategic advantage, now presents a challenge worthy of the most intense engineering showdown. Rising sea levels threaten to turn Venice into a real-life Atlantis, a problem so pressing that the city has invested billions in the MoSE project, a series of mobile barriers designed to hold back the Adriatic's advances. It's a high-stakes gamble with a price tag of over $6 billion, underscoring that Venice's struggle against the tides, both literal and metaphorical, is far from over. Yet, while Venice battles the elements, it also contends with the economic realities of modern tourism. With an annual influx of around 25 million visitors, the city's infrastructure groans under the weight and the local population dwindles, dropping below 55,000 residents. It's an ironic twist. Venice, once a city of merchants and mariners, now finds its lifeblood in souvenir shops and guided tours. So, what's Venice's legacy? It's a city that, despite its faded empire, stands as a monument to human ingenuity and resilience. Its history is a tapestry woven with threads of trade and diplomacy, art and architecture, cunning and creativity. Venice is a reminder that even when empires fall, their stories endure, captivating imaginations and inspiring generations. In the end, Venice's allure lies in its contradictions. It's a city that thrives on its myths, yet lives with the reality of sinking foundations. It's a place where the past coexists with the present, each echoing off ancient stones and modern selfies. Venice's story is one of perpetual reinvention, a city that refuses to be defined by its decline, but instead embraces its role as a timeless wonder, a jewel in the crown of history. As you sip your espresso on a sun-dappled terrace overlooking the Grand Canal, remember that Venice is more than just a picturesque backdrop. It's a city that has danced with destiny, weathered the storms of time, and emerged with its mystique intact. In Venice, history isn't just something you learn, it's something you experience, with every step on its cobblestone streets and every ripple in its emerald waters. So, next time you're there, take a moment to appreciate both the legend and the reality, because in Venice both are equally enchanting. And as the gondolas continue to glide, just know they're not merely vessels of romance, they're bearers of a legacy that's as deep and enduring as the lagoon itself. In the quaint little village of Zundert, Netherlands, 1853, a boy was born who would eventually paint the world with colours it didn't even know it had. Vincent van Gogh arrived on March 30, a date that would become renowned among art enthusiasts. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before he turned into the post-impressionist legend we know today, Vincent was just another awkward kid in a middle-class family trying to make ends meet. His father, Theodorus, was a minister, a career Vincent would later attempt with less than spectacular results. And his mother, Anna, was a homemaker, managing an ever-growing household that saw many children come and go. Now, talking about middle-class struggles in the 19th century is like discussing water in the ocean. It's vast, deep, and mostly uncharted. The Van Gogh family wasn't exactly swimming in florins, and the pressure to find a respectable career was palpable for young Vincent. His first foray into the working world was as an art dealer, a position his uncle Cent secured for him at Goupil and Cie, a prestigious art dealership. At first glance, it seemed like a match made in heaven, given his later fame. But as it turned out, Vincent's talent for selling art was about as successful as a fish trying to climb a tree. Sure, he had the eye for art, but his people skills were akin to a porcupine in a balloon shop. After a few years of awkward social interactions and a penchant for being brutally honest, his time as an art dealer ended with him being shown the door. Never one to give up easily, Vincent tried his luck at teaching. He landed a gig in Ramsgate, England, where he taught at a small boarding school. Imagine Vincent with his fiery red hair and intense gaze, trying to corral a group of rowdy kids who probably thought he was a bit of a mystery. It didn't help that his English was far from fluent, leading to some rather amusing class romantics. His teaching career was short-lived, lasting about as long as a British summer, and soon enough Vincent was back on the job market. In a twist that could only be described as divine comedy, Vincent decided to follow in his father's footsteps and try his hand at theology. Now, if you think Vincent the artist was intense, you should have seen him as a theology student. He was passionate, no doubt, but his approach was more firebrand than scholarly. He enrolled in the University of Amsterdam with the intention of becoming a minister, but his fascination with religious fervour didn't translate well into academic success. The fact that he failed his exams might have been a sign from above, or just an indication that memorizing ancient Greek wasn't his forte. But the pièce de résistance of Vincent's early career escapades was his attempt to become a minister in the Borinage, a coal mining district in Belgium. Picture this Vincent, clad not in a minister's robe but in rags, having donated his own clothes to the miners. It was a noble gesture, sure, but it left him looking more like a wandering ascetic than a man of the cloth. His extreme empathy, an unconventional approach like living in a hut and sharing his food with the miners, didn't sit well with the church authorities. They saw him as more of a wild-eyed prophet than a respectable preacher and refused to renew his contract. These early career misadventures were more than just comical footnotes in Vincent's life. They reveal the restless search for purpose that defined his early years. He craved a mission, something grander than the mundane trappings of a middle-class life. It's almost poetic that his failures in traditional careers paved the way for his ultimate success as an artist, a field where his passion, intensity, and unique vision found a home. As we consider these early chapters of Vincent's life, it's clear that his journey was anything but linear. But then again, who wants a straight line when you can have a Van Gogh swirl? And just like that, Vincent's winding road of failures and self-discovery led him to a point where, let's be honest, many of us have found ourselves staring into the abyss of a quarter-life crisis. But instead of buying a Vespa or backpacking through Europe, Vincent picked up a paintbrush. Not exactly an easy choice in an era when being an artist was about as financially stable as a one-legged stool. Yet, for Vincent, it was the only path that made sense. By the time he hit his mid-20s, Vincent had already dabbled in more careers than most people do in a lifetime: art dealer, teacher, preacher, and perhaps the most unsuccessful theology student in Amsterdam. But art was different. It wasn't just a career, it was a calling, a siren song that promised fulfillment without the constraints of societal norms. In 1880, Vincent decided to dive headfirst into this risky venture, and thus began the tumultuous love affair with painting that would define his legacy. Now, let's talk about The Potato Eaters, painted in 1885. If you think your family dinners are awkward, you haven't met this bunch. This grim masterpiece features a group of peasants huddled around a table, their faces etched with hardship as they partake in a meal of potatoes and, surprise, more potatoes. The palette is as muted as a Monday morning, with browns, greens, and the occasional flicker of light from an oil lamp. Vincent was determined to capture the raw, unvarnished reality of rural life, warts and all. No romanticized pastoral scenes here, folks, just the gritty truth of subsistence living. Vincent's obsession with depicting peasant life wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a statement. He wanted to show the world the dignity and beauty in the everyday struggles of the working class. And let's face it, in the 1880s, peasants were about as fashionable as bell-bottoms in the 1980s. Yet Vincent saw nobility where others saw drudgery, a bold move that didn't exactly win him fans in the art world. Critics at the time were less than kind, dismissing his work as crude and unrefined. But Vincent wasn't painting for the critics. He was painting for the people, for the truth, and for himself. It's worth noting that Vincent was largely self-taught, a fact that might have saved him from art school debt, but not from the snide remarks of the formally educated. He devoured art books, studied the works of old masters, and endlessly practiced sketching. He was like a sponge, soaking up techniques and styles, yet always adding his own twist. No prestigious atelier or fancy diploma was going to define him. Instead, he forged his own path, sometimes with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, but always with an unyielding passion. But let's not sugarcoat this. Vincent's journey was anything but easy. Picture trying to learn an intricate dance in the dark, with only your intuition to guide you. That's what Vincent was doing with painting. He grappled with technique, perspective, and color theory like a dog with a new trick, all while living hand to mouth. The man was so broke that he often chose between buying paint or food, and let's just say the paints usually won. In fact, during his stay in Nuenen, Vincent was producing art at a frantic pace, churning out over 200 paintings and drawings in just 2 years. The guy was a human dynamo, driven by an insatiable need to create. He'd rise with the sun, capturing the first light on canvas, and wouldn't stop until the last glow of the day faded. His subjects ranged from weavers to farmers, reflecting his deep empathy for the working class. He wasn't just painting scenes, he was documenting lives, with every brushstroke telling a story of resilience and toil. Even as Vincent was pouring his soul onto canvas, the art community was less than welcoming. His style was unconventional, his colours too dark, his subjects too raw. The critics had a field day, and art schools? Well, they probably chuckled into their croissants at this self-taught upstart who dared to think he could paint. But Vincent, bless his stubborn heart, didn't care. He was blazing his own trail, one potato-laden canvas at a time. And let's talk about those colours, shall we? Vincent's early works were moody, almost brooding, with a palette that resembled the inside of a coal mine. But this was intentional. He wanted to evoke the sombre reality of peasant life, to convey the struggles and the stark beauty within. Yet, beneath those dark hues lay a foundation for the explosion of colour that would later become his signature style. It's almost as if he was warming up, stretching his creative muscles for the masterpiece marathon that lay ahead. But here's the kicker. Despite the lack of commercial success and the sting of rejection, Vincent remained undeterred. His brother Theo, ever the supportive sibling, was his lifeline, both financially and emotionally. Their correspondence is a treasure trove of insights, revealing not just Vincent's struggles and triumphs, but his unshakable belief in his art. He wrote to Theo about his desire to create something meaningful, something that would resonate long after he was gone. And while the world wasn't ready for Vincent's vision during his lifetime, his unwavering commitment laid the groundwork for the seismic shift in art that was to come. As we consider this chapter of Vincent's life, it's a testament to the power of perseverance and passion. He may have been mocked, criticized, and dismissed, but he never wavered in his quest to capture the world as he saw it. This was a man who painted with his heart on his sleeve and his soul in his brush, unafraid to defy conventions and challenge perceptions. So, what's the takeaway here? Maybe it's that true art isn't about following trends or appeasing critics. It's about staying true to oneself, even when the odds are stacked against you. Vincent's early works, with their gritty realism and masterful storytelling, remind us that beauty can be found in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the most compelling stories are told not in grand halls, but around humble tables, over a meal of simple potatoes. And so, Vincent van Gogh, the art world's ultimate underdog, packed his bags and set his sights on the City of Light, Paris, in 1886. It was a bold move, like a moth deciding to vacation on the sun, but Vincent was nothing if not audacious. Paris at the time was the heart of the art world, a bustling metropolis where the air was thick with creativity, and the cafes were filled with artists debating the finer points of pointillism over espresso. Vincent arrived in Paris with his characteristic fervour and a desire to reinvent himself. In this city, where Impressionism was blooming like the cherry blossoms in the Tuileries, Vincent found himself surrounded by a new world of colour and light. It was here that he met the movers and shakers of the art scene, including the likes of Henri de Toulouse, Lautrec, Paul Signac, and the iconic duo of Camille Pissarro and Claude Monet. Imagine Vincent, the awkward Dutchman with his fiery beard, mingling with these French luminaries, an artist among artists finally feeling a sense of belonging. But let's not romanticize this too much. Paris wasn't all baguettes and berets for Vincent. The reality was grittier, with Vincent living in a cramped apartment in Montmartre, an area that was more bohemian than bourgeois. He shared this modest space with his brother Theo, who worked as an art dealer. Their bond was the stuff of legends, with Theo not only providing financial support, but also emotional backing, a lifeline amidst the turbulent seas of Vincent's creative journey. While in Paris, Vincent's style underwent a dramatic transformation. It was as if he had been painting in black and white and suddenly discovered Technicolor. He embraced the vibrant palette of the Impressionists, trading his brooding browns for bright yellows and electric blues. The influence of these artists was unmistakable, and Vincent soaked it up like a sponge in a paint spill, as if each stroke of the brush was a sip of the city's intoxicating artistic brew. In this period of intense creativity, Vincent produced over 200 paintings. His subjects expanded from the sombre peasants of Nouenin to the bustling streets and vibrant nightlife of Paris. His canvases became a cacophony of colour and movement, capturing everything from blossoming orchards to the lively cafes where he spent countless evenings. It was also in Paris that Vincent crossed paths with Paul Gauguin, a fellow artist whose life was as colourful as his canvases. The two men struck up a friendship that was as intense as it was volatile. They shared a passion for art and a penchant for heated debates, with their discussions often ending in fiery disagreements. Gauguin, the suave Frenchman with a penchant for Tahitian escapades, and Van Gogh, the intense, tortured soul, were an odd couple to say the least. Yet their camaraderie was genuine, fueled by a shared desire to push the boundaries of art. This brings us to the infamous ear incident of 1888, a story that's as legendary as it is misunderstood. The myth goes that Van Gogh locked off his own ear in a fit of madness after a quarrel with Gauguin. But let's peel back the layers of this myth. While it's true that the two had a falling out, possibly involving a heated exchange over artistic differences, the reality is a bit murkier. Some historians suggest that it was actually a self-defense move gone wrong, with Gauguin wielding a sword. Others propose that Vincent, in the throes of a mental health crisis, did indeed harm himself. Regardless of the specifics, it was a tragic episode, emblematic of Vincent's troubled psyche and the intensity of his relationships. The aftermath of the ear incident was sobering. Vincent was admitted to the hospital, and his friendship with Gauguin was irreparably damaged. The media, ever hungry for scandal, sensationalized the story, turning Vincent into a tragic figure of public fascination. It was a classic case of an artist's melodrama becoming tabloid fodder, with the truth often lost in the retelling. Yet this episode also highlighted the fragile line between genius and madness, a theme that has become inextricably linked with Vincent's legacy. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Vincent's time in Paris was pivotal. It was here that he refined his technique, experimented with new ideas, and forged connections that would influence his work for years to come. The city was a crucible of creativity, and Vincent emerged from it with a renewed vision, ready to tackle the next chapter of his life with the same fervent intensity that had become his trademark. As we leave Vincent in Paris, poised for his eventual move to Arles, it's clear that the city had left an indelible mark on him. His art had evolved, his horizons had broadened, and he had tasted both the camaraderie and conflict that comes with living in a community of artists. Paris had been a canvas of its own, and Vincent had painted his own story upon it, one of passion, struggle, and unyielding dedication to his craft. In many ways, Vincent's journey in Paris encapsulated the broader narrative of his life, a relentless pursuit of beauty and truth, driven by an insatiable desire to capture the world as he saw it. It was a pursuit that would continue to define him, even as he moved away from the bustling streets of Montmartre to the sun-drenched fields of Provence. And so, with a palette of newfound colours and a heart full of both hope and heartache, Vincent prepared to leave the City of Light behind. But the story doesn't end here, dear reader. There's more to uncover about the enigmatic Vincent van Gogh, as his journey takes him to the south of France, where he would create some of his most iconic works and face the greatest challenges of his life. Stay tuned, because this tale of art, madness and genius is far from over. So, as Vincent packed his bags and traded the bustling boulevards of Paris for the sun-soaked fields of Arles, he was a man on a mission. His journey south in February 1888 marked the beginning of an artistic marathon that would see him produce over 300 works in just 15 months. That's like cranking out a masterpiece every other day. Talk about hustle. Arles was a far cry from Paris. It was a sleepy little town in Provence, where the sun seemed to linger longer, and the landscape was a living canvas of vibrant yellows and greens. For Vincent, it was love at first sight. He arrived with his eyes wide open, eager to capture the light and colour that seemed to dance across the fields and rooftops. Imagine the town as his personal playground, where the palette was brighter, the pace slower, and the inspiration boundless. One of Vincent's first obsessions in Arles was sunflowers. Ah, yes, the sunny blooms that have become as synonymous with Van Gogh as starry nights and ear-related incidents. Over the summer of 1888, he painted a series of sunflower still lifes that practically radiate off the canvas. These weren't your garden variety flowers, folks. They were Vincent's way of capturing the sun itself, with petals like golden flames and centres that seemed to pulse with life. But before you get too caught up in the romance of it all, remember, this was the same guy who famously got a bit too scissor-happy with his ear. Vincent's fixation on sunflowers wasn't just about capturing beauty. It was about finding a symbol of warmth and hope amidst his own personal chaos. These paintings were as much about his internal struggles as they were about the external world. And then there's Starry Night, painted in June 1889. Now, I know what you're thinking. Iconic, right? This swirling celestial masterpiece is practically a rite of passage for art lovers and dorm room decorators alike. It's Vincent's magnum opus, and yet it wasn't even painted in Arles, but in a nearby asylum at Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. More on that later. In Starry Night, Vincent poured his imagination onto the canvas, creating a night sky that feels alive, with stars that swirl and dance like whirlpools of light. It's a view from his asylum window, yes, but it's also a view from inside his mind, a place where reality and fantasy blurred into something uniquely Van Gogh. This wasn't just a landscape, it was an expression of his inner turmoil, a visual symphony of emotion and existential longing. But let's hit pause on the romantic rhapsody for a moment. While Vincent's time in Arles was artistically prolific, it was also marked by intense emotional upheaval. His mental health was a roller coaster on a rickety track, with periods of intense creativity punctuated by bouts of depression and isolation. The man was a walking dichotomy, a vibrant artist battling the shadowy depths of his own mind. This brings us to the romantic notion of the tortured genius. Oh, how we love the idea of the suffering artist whose pain fuels their creativity. It's a narrative as old as time, but let's face it, it's a bit of a cop-out. Vincent's struggles were real, and they were debilitating. His mental illness wasn't some muse whispering inspiration in his ear, it was a relentless storm that he had to weather just to survive. Vincent's letters to his brother Theo paint a stark picture of his state of mind. He wrote of terrible fits of anxiety and sorrowful and gloomy moods, a testament to the harsh reality behind the romantic myth. His art wasn't born out of madness. It was a way to cope with it, a lifeline in a sea of despair. Economically, Vincent's situation was equally grim. Despite his prolific output, he was still financially dependent on Theo, who sent him regular allowances to cover his living expenses and art supplies. It was a precarious existence, where each brushstroke came with the weight of financial uncertainty. Imagine crafting masterpieces while knowing your next meal depended on your brother's paycheck. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, Vincent's resolve never wavered. He continued to push the boundaries of his art, experimenting with color, form, and perspective in ways that baffled his contemporaries. He was a man possessed, driven by an insatiable need to create, to capture the world in all its chaotic beauty. In Arles, Vincent also dreamt of establishing an artist's colony, a utopian haven where artists could live and work in harmony. He envisioned it as a studio of the South, a place where creativity would flourish under the Provençal sun. Alas, his dream was never realized, but it speaks to his unyielding belief in the power of art to unite and inspire. As we delve into this chapter of Vincent's life, it's a potent mix of triumph and tragedy. Here was a man who found solace and suffering in equal measure, whose legacy is as much about his art as it is about his enduring struggle with mental illness. The romanticized image of the tortured genius might make for a compelling story, but the truth is far more complex and infinitely more human. So, as Vincent continued to paint his way through Arles, he left behind not just a body of work, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. His time in Provence was a whirlwind of colour and emotion, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is beauty to be found. And while his journey was far from over, the seeds of his enduring legacy were firmly planted in those sun-drenched fields. Stay tuned, because there's more to this tale of art, adversity, and the indomitable will of Vincent van Gogh. The story is far from over, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And so, as we follow Vincent through the sun-soaked fields of Arles and into his final chapter, it's important to remind ourselves that the man was a study in contrasts, a maestro of colour and light, yet living in a world that seemed to only offer shades of grey. By 1889, Vincent's mental health was on a downward spiral faster than a roller coaster with faulty brakes. Following a series of violent episodes, he voluntarily checked himself into the Saint Paul de Mausolée Asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, where he would spend the last year of his life. Now, let's pause for a moment and consider the economic reality of being Vincent van Gogh. Despite his prolific output, some 2,100 artworks, including around 860 oil paintings, Vincent famously sold just one painting during his lifetime. Yes, you heard that right, one. That was The Red Vineyard, which fetched 400 francs in 1890, roughly $1,000 in today's money. Hardly enough to cover the cost of a decent vacation, let alone a lifetime of artistic endeavours. It's the classic starving artist trope. Except Vincent wasn't just starving for cash, he was starving for recognition. While Vincent was battling his demons, his brother Theo was playing the unsung hero in a drama worthy of an Oscar. Theo, a successful art dealer, championed Vincent's work tirelessly, even when the art world turned a blind eye. He believed in Vincent's genius with the kind of unwavering faith that makes even the most loyal golden retriever look fickle. Their correspondence remains one of the most poignant records of Vincent's life, revealing not just the artist's struggles but also the depth of his bond with Theo, a relationship that was both a lifeline and a source of inspiration. In the spring of 1890, Vincent moved to the small village of Auvers-sur-Oise, just outside Paris, under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, a physician who fancied himself an amateur artist. If you think that's a recipe for disaster, you're not entirely wrong. But Gachet's influence was somewhat positive, encouraging Vincent to paint prolifically. During his 70 days in Auvers, Vincent created 70 paintings, a staggering output that speaks to his relentless drive, even as his mental health continued to deteriorate. On July 27, 1890, Vincent shot himself in the chest in a wheat field and succumbed to his injuries 2 days later. He was 37 years old. It's a tragic end that has become almost mythic, a tortured artist meeting a premature demise. But let's not romanticize this too much. Vincent's death was a devastating loss, not just for his family, but for the art world that had yet to recognize the magnitude of his talent. It's a somber reminder that sometimes genius isn't appreciated in its own time. The irony of Vincent van Gogh's story is that his posthumous fame soared faster than a SpaceX rocket. After his death, it was Theo's widow, Johanna van Gogh Bonga, who became the steward of Vincent's legacy. Armed with Vincent's paintings and the brothers' extensive correspondence, she orchestrated exhibitions and promoted his work with the kind of savvy that would make a modern PR agent envious. Johanna wasn't just preserving Vincent's legacy, she was crafting a narrative that would elevate him to the pantheon of art history. By the early 20th century, Vincent's paintings were fetching prices that would make even the most seasoned collectors do a double-take. His works became emblematic of the post-impressionist movement, celebrated for their bold colors, emotional intensity, and innovative techniques. Today, his paintings hang in the most prestigious museums and command astronomical sums at auctions. In 1990, Portrait of Dr. Gachet sold for $82.5 million, equivalent to $170 million today, quite the price jump from that single painting sale during his life. But why did Vincent's art resonate so profoundly after his death? Perhaps it's because his work speaks to something deeply human, a raw, unfiltered emotion that transcends time and place. His paintings are more than just images. They're windows into a soul that saw the world in vivid hues, even when reality seemed dim. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of art to capture the complexities of the human experience. As we wrap up this exploration of Vincent van Gogh's life, it's worth reflecting on what his story tells us about the nature of legacy. Vincent wasn't a marketing genius, he was an artist who poured his soul onto the canvas, driven by a compulsion to create, despite the world's indifference. His story is a poignant reminder that true recognition isn't measured in sales or accolades, but in the lasting impact of one's work. Vincent may have died without fame or fortune, but his paintings continue to captivate and inspire, a testament to the timelessness of his vision. In the end, Vincent van Gogh's journey is one of perseverance, passion, and the enduring struggle to find beauty amidst adversity. His life was a whirlwind of colour and chaos, a vivid tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and despair. As we consider his legacy, it challenges us to look beyond the myths and embrace the full complexity of his story, a story of an artist who, despite the odds, painted his own place in history. And so, even as we close the book on Vincent's life, his art continues to speak, whispering to us through the ages that sometimes genius waits in the shadows for its moment in the sun. In the early 16th century, the Safavid Empire was strutting onto the world stage like a peacock at a pigeon convention, and it needed a wardrobe to match. Here was a fledgling empire, led by Shah Ismail I, who had managed to snag the Persian throne in 51 and was looking to establish some serious street cred. And what better way to flex than with art and culture that screamed opulence? Enter the Persian carpet, a tapestry of threads interwoven with ambition and artistry. Now, let's talk about carpets. Not the kind you spill coffee on during your Monday morning disaster, but the kind that would make European aristocrats drool and Ottoman sultans green with envy. The Safavids weren't just weaving pretty rugs, they were crafting masterpieces that would eventually become the bling of the Renaissance world. A Persian carpet was more than a floor covering. It was a status symbol, a conversation starter, and an economic powerhouse rolled into one. Fast forward to the late 16th century, and the empire is under the reign of Shah Abbas I, a ruler with a strategic mind sharper than a carpet weaver's needle. Abbas was not your average monarch. Known for his ambitious reforms and knack for diplomacy, he saw the potential in Persian carpets, not just as artistic triumphs, but as diplomatic currency. His vision was clear. Put Persian carpets on the map and in the palaces of every European royal worth their salt. Abbas wasn't working alone. He tapped into the skills of master weavers from across Persia, centralizing production in royal workshops in cities like Isfahan, Kashan, and Tabriz. This wasn't just some arts and crafts project. We're talking about an industrial operation that would make your local IKEA look like a lemonade stand. The Persian carpet industry was essentially the 17th century equivalent of Silicon Valley, cutting edge, lucrative, and full of potential to change the world. Economic motivations were as colourful as the carpets themselves. These woven wonders were not just cultural artefacts, they were cash cows. European demand for Persian carpets was higher than a kite at a festival, and Shah Abbas knew it. By boosting carpet production, he wasn't just decorating his palaces, he was creating a product that could be exported for serious cash. We're talking about an industry that helped fund armies, build cities, and line the pockets of Persian merchants with more gold than a pirate's treasure chest. But let's not sugarcoat it. Behind the shimmering fibres and intricate designs lay the harsh realities of labour and politics. The art of carpet weaving was labour-intensive, requiring years of apprenticeship and skill. Each rug was a kaleidoscope of effort, with weavers toiling away for months, sometimes years, to complete a single piece. The economic benefits were real, but so were the calluses on the hands of those who crafted these masterpieces. While romantic tales of Persian carpets often focus on their beauty, let's peel back the rug, pun intended, and look at the broader picture. These carpets were a tool of empire building, a way to project power and prestige across continents. They were diplomatic gifts, bargaining chips, and sometimes even propaganda tools. Forget Instagram influencers. Shah Abbas was the original master of brand building, and Persian carpets were his luxury line. So, as the Safavid Empire evolved, so did its carpets. They became ambassadors in their own right, weaving tales of Persian craftsmanship and opulence into the very fabric of European high society. And while the myths surrounding their creation might shimmer like silk, the truth is as complex and interwoven as the carpets themselves. The Safavids' carpet renaissance was a masterstroke of art, economy, and politics, creating a legacy that still resonates in the modern world, even if the original weavers might raise an eyebrow at how their hard work is now casually trampled underfoot. But let's not get tangled up in the romance of Persian carpets without unraveling how these masterpieces were actually created. Weaving such a carpet wasn't a dreamy endeavor, but rather a marathon of skill and patience. If you think finishing a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle is a feat, try spending months or even years tying knots with the precision of a surgeon. We're talking about a process that would make a Swiss watchmaker feel hurried. First off, let's bust a myth as persistent as a rogue thread. Persian carpets were not whipped up overnight by magical weavers. These weren't your grandma's crochet projects. A single carpet could require up to 12 artisans working simultaneously, each one more skilled than the last. They'd labor over wooden looms, their fingers dancing across threads like seasoned pianists. You see, weaving a Persian carpet was less about speed and more about the art of patience, a concept as foreign to us today as dial-up internet. Every carpet was an intricate puzzle of design and symbolism, with patterns often inspired by Persian gardens and poetry. Think of them as the Pinterest boards of the 16th century. The weavers employed a technique known as knitting from memory. That's right, no cheat sheets or Google to fall back on. The weavers memorized complex patterns and recreated them thread by thread, knot by knot. Some designs were so complicated, they'd make a Rube Goldberg machine look like a straightforward IKEA instruction manual. Now, let's talk regions. Just as your local coffee shop has its own unique vibe, different areas of Persia had distinct weaving styles. Isfahan, for instance, was renowned for its floral motifs and rich colors, while Kashan boasted intricate curvilinear designs. Tabriz, ever the rebel, specialized in bold, geometric patterns. These differences weren't just artistic whims, but were shaped by the resources and traditions of each region, a testament to how geography can influence art as much as the artist's hand. Local plants dictated the dyes, local sheep provided the wool, and local customs influenced the patterns. It's a bit like how New Yorkers swear by their pizza and Texans won't touch anything but their own BBQ. And then there are the weavers themselves, the unsung heroes behind the opulent curtains of the Safavid Empire. Often anonymous, these artisans were the backbone of an industry that bridged continents. While Shah Abbas was busy schmoozing European royals, these weavers were the ones whose hands turned raw materials into royal masterpieces. These guys, and gals, because let's be real, women were a huge part of this workforce, were the Silicon Valley engineers of their day except without the stock options and free kombucha. The reality was, weaving was a family affair, passed down through generations like secret recipes. Children learned the trade at an early age, their small fingers adept at tying the tiny Persian knots that were the hallmark of quality. They worked long hours, often in cramped conditions, yet their skill and dedication transformed simple wool into opulent art. It was hard work, no doubt, but it was also a source of pride and identity, a way to make one's mark on the world one knot at a time. And let's not forget the economics. The Persian carpet trade was a major economic engine, employing thousands and fueling local economies. But it wasn't all rugs and roses. The profit margins for the weavers themselves were often as thin as their threads. The real money went to the merchants and the Shah's coffers, while the artisans remained the unsung laborers in a grand economic tapestry. So, while the allure of Persian carpets glows like a beacon through history, the reality is grounded in the grit and toil of those who crafted them. These carpets were not just art, they were the product of a sophisticated and labor-intensive industry, a testament to human creativity and perseverance. As we continue to weave through this story, remember, behind every masterpiece is a weaver, knotting together the threads of history with skill and dedication, one painstaking loop at a time. Now, let's dive under the surface of these luxurious floor coverings and explore how they became the Swiss Army knife of the Safavid Empire's foreign policy toolkit, versatile, indispensable, and always ready to impress. You see, while the carpets were the epitome of Persian art and craftsmanship, they were also the ultimate in diplomatic bling. Imagine a state dinner, where instead of a handshake or a gold watch, you hand over a hand-knotted masterpiece. That's how Shah Abbas played the game, using carpets as a way to cement alliances and influence European royals faster than you can say Silk Road. In the cutthroat world of 17th century geopolitics, status was everything, and nothing said, "I have arrived," quite like owning a Persian carpet, the ultimate status symbol. These weren't just rugs, they were the red carpets of diplomacy, rolled out to smooth over any potential bumps in international relations. Shah Abbas knew that setting a Persian carpet under the feet of a European monarch was like dropping a mic, an undeniable display of power and sophistication. The economic impact was equally impressive. The demand for these woven wonders was so intense that it transformed trade routes into bustling arteries of commerce, connecting the Persian heartland with markets as far-flung as Venice, Amsterdam, and beyond. The Armenian merchants were the unsung heroes of this trade network, acting as the middlemen who knew the routes like the back of their hand, or, perhaps more appropriately, like the back of a carpet. These merchants were like the Amazon of their day, ensuring that the intricate patterns of Persia found their way into the opulent palaces of Europe. Armenian merchants didn't just deal with carpets, they were also connoisseurs of the trade winds, navigating the complexities of international commerce with the finesse of a modern-day stock trader. They were shrewd negotiators who managed to carve out a niche in the highly competitive luxury market. They knew that a Persian carpet was worth its weight in gold, literally, often bartered for precious metals and gems, making them the ultimate luxury currency of the time. But let's not lose sight of the cold, hard reality. These carpets were strategic economic assets, not just artistic indulgences. The Safavid rulers, particularly Abbas, were keenly aware that the carpet industry was a linchpin in their economic policy. The Persians weren't just weaving carpets, they were weaving an economy, one knot at a time. Carpet production was a calculated move to boost exports and bring in foreign currency, which was then funneled back into the empire to fund everything from military campaigns to urban development. The romantic notion of carpets as purely artistic endeavours is a lovely thought, but let's not kid ourselves. This was a commercial enterprise as much as an artistic one. The Safavid rulers had a keen eye on the bottom line, and carpets were a cash cow that mooed all the way to the imperial treasury. It's easy to get swept up in the allure of Persian carpets as objects of beauty, but beneath the surface lies a story of economic strategy and empire building. This brings us to the bustling trade routes, the veins through which the lifeblood of the empire flowed. These trade routes were more than just paths for merchants. They were the highways of cultural exchange, connecting the east to the west in a tapestry of commerce and diplomacy. The Persian Gulf, the Silk Road, and the Caspian Sea were all critical conduits for this trade, and the Safavids were savvy navigators of these waters, ensuring that their crafts reached the eager hands of European elites. And speaking of eager hands, let's not forget the European collectors who were more than happy to part with their coin for a piece of Persian paradise. These carpets were not just floor coverings, they were conversation pieces, symbols of wealth and taste that spoke volumes about their owners. In a world where first impressions were everything, a Persian carpet was the ultimate icebreaker, a way to say, "Look at me, uncultured and sophisticated," without uttering a single word. As we continue to unravel the story of the Safavid carpets, remember that these masterpieces were more than just pretty patterns. They were the threads that tied together an empire, a testament to the power of art as both a cultural and economic force. In the hands of the Safavids, carpets became the ultimate tool of diplomacy and commerce, a legacy that continues to resonate centuries later. While the romance of Persian carpets endures, it's the gritty reality of their creation and strategic use that truly underscores their importance. So, as we step forward in this tale, keep in mind the dual nature of these woven wonders, both as objects of beauty and as strategic assets in the grand tapestry of history. And so, the Safavid Empire's story weaves on, but not all threads are golden. As we dive into the empire's twilight years, we find that the once mighty Safavids were unraveling faster than you can say Persian rug sale. Internal strife, economic hiccups, and external pressures were the unwelcome guests at a party that had been going splendidly well until it wasn't. Let's start with the internal strife. Picture this: Shah Abbas I, the empire's golden boy, had set a high bar with his knack for diplomacy and carpet diplomacy. But his successors, not quite as sharp. Following Abbas's death in 1629, the Safavid throne became a game of musical chairs, and not the fun kind. We're talking about a throne that saw more turnovers in leadership than a bakery sees dough. By the time Shah Sultan Hussein ascended the throne in 1694, the empire was already tottering like a drunk uncle at a wedding. Hussein, bless his heart, was more interested in poetry and piety than politics and power. His reign was marked by internal dissent and corruption, with provincial governors acting like mini-dynasties in their own right. Imagine trying to run an empire with a bunch of unruly teenagers refusing to listen to dad. That was the Safavid leadership. Now, add to that economic challenges that were about as welcome as a moth in a wool factory. The once booming Persian carpet trade began to fray at the edges. Why? Well, for starters, inflation had hit the empire harder than a rogue wave. The cost of materials skyrocketed, and the local currency, the Abbasi, was devaluing faster than a meme stock after a Twitter scandal. This put a serious crimp in the carpet industry's style, as the cost of producing these woven wonders began to outweigh the benefits. And let's not forget the dreaded external pressures. The Safavids were sandwiched between two empires that had zero chill, the Ottomans to the west and the Mughals to the east. Both empires had their eyes on Persian territory like a hawk eyeing a rabbit. The Safavids were caught in a geopolitical squeeze, with the Ottomans seizing Baghdad in 1638 and the Afghans rebelling in 79. It was a classic case of being stuck between a rock and a hard place, or, in this case, between two imperial juggernauts. So, what did this mean for our beloved Persian carpets? Well, the decline of the Safavid Empire hit the textile industry like a sucker punch. The quality of carpets began to slip as resources dwindled. The once vibrant dyes became muted, and the intricate designs that made Persian carpets famous started to lose their complexity. It's as if the carpets themselves were reflecting the empire's fading glory, a tangible symbol of decline. But let's not toss our rugs out with the bathwater just yet. Despite the political upheaval, some traditions proved as resilient as a well-crafted Persian knot. The art of carpet weaving persisted, carried forward by those who saw it as more than just a trade. For many weavers, this was a family legacy, a craft passed down through generations like a cherished heirloom. In regions like Kashan and Tabriz, the craft continued to flourish, albeit at a slower pace. This resilience can be chalked up to the cultural importance of carpets in Persian society. These works of art were more than just decorative items. They were woven into the very fabric of Persian life, used in homes, mosques, and as diplomatic gifts. Even as the empire crumbled, the cultural significance of carpets ensured their survival, a testament to the enduring nature of art in the face of adversity. In a world gone topsy-turvy, the weavers were the unsung heroes who kept the tradition alive. They adapted to changing circumstances, using whatever materials were at hand to continue creating. It might not have been the golden age of carpet weaving that flourished under Shah Abbas, but these artisans were determined to keep the legacy alive, knot by knot, thread by thread. So, as we untangle the threads of the Safavid Empire's decline, remember this: even in the face of political chaos and economic turmoil, the art of carpet weaving endured. It's a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the cultural practices they leave behind have a way of persisting, a resilient thread woven through the tapestry of history. And with that, we leave the story open, ready to explore what comes next in this rich, interwoven tale. Even as the Safavid Empire unraveled like a poorly tied knot, their legacy, particularly that of the Persian carpets, refused to fade into oblivion. Fast forward to the present day, and you'll find that these historical masterpieces are just as desirable as they were when European nobles were tripping over their robes to get their hands on one. What makes these rugs so enduringly appealing? Well, it's a mix of historical heft, artistic genius, and, let's be honest, a pinch of good old-fashioned mystique. The legacy of Safavid carpets continues to loom large in today's art and fashion scenes, like a scholarly ghost that refuses to be exorcised. These textiles are the OG influencers, setting trends long before TikTok was a twinkle in the internet's eye. Their intricate designs and lush textures have found echoes in everything from haute couture to contemporary interior design. Designers like Yves Saint Laurent and Christian Dior have drawn inspiration from the swirling motifs and opulent colors of Persian carpets, proving that good taste, much like those carpets, never goes out of style. Indeed, the influence of Safavid carpet designs is seen in modern art galleries and fashion runways across the globe. Artists like Jackson Pollock, known for his chaotic canvases, reportedly drew inspiration from the intricate patterns of Persian rugs. The same can be said for fashion designers who see the carpet's bold colors and designs as a challenge to the drab and mundane. In a world where fast fashion reigns supreme, the enduring appeal of something painstakingly crafted by hand speaks volumes about our craving for authenticity. But let's not get so enchanted by the allure of these carpets that we overlook the grit behind the glamour. The romanticized image of a solitary weaver creating art in a sun-dappled room while appealing is far removed from reality. The truth is, these carpets were the products of labor-intensive workshops where artisans, often entire families, worked tirelessly for months, if not years, on a single masterpiece. The cost of a high-quality Persian carpet in today's market can range from a few $1,000s to several $100,000, a testament to both their rarity and the labor that went into their creation. This brings us to the darker threads in the tapestry trade and labor. The Safavid carpet industry was a mammoth operation that required a deft balance of artistry and economics. While Shah Abbas I might have been the Steve Jobs of his time, revolutionizing the carpet industry like a tech giant with a new gadget, the weavers were the unsung heroes, crafting these icons with skill and sweat. For all the glamour these carpets exude, they also tell a story of class divides and labor exploitation, issues that resonate even in today's world. Yet the mythos surrounding Persian carpets persists, buoyed by their beauty and the tales they carry. They symbolize the pinnacle of luxury and craftsmanship, much like a well-aged bottle of wine or a classic sports car. In a consumer culture that often prizes speed over substance, the painstaking process of crafting these carpets serves as a poignant reminder of the value of time and effort. The allure of the Persian carpet is not just in the aesthetics, but in the narrative of human perseverance and creativity. And let's talk about their role as cultural ambassadors. In the same way a well-tailored suit can make a statement, a Persian carpet adds a touch of gravitas to any setting. They're not just floor coverings, they're conversation starters, each one a woven saga of history, culture, and craftsmanship. Even today, owning a Persian carpet is akin to possessing a piece of art, a portable, walkable artwork that speaks to a long history of human artistry and ambition. In the grand tapestry of history, Safavid carpets are the threads that refuse to fade. They've been trampled underfoot, quite literally, yet rise time and again to capture our imagination and admiration. They stand as a testament to an era when art and commerce were intertwined, like the very knots that bind these carpets together. So, as we roll up this tale like a carpet, naturally, let's appreciate not just the beauty of these textiles, but also the stories they tell. They are reminders of a time when artistry was a currency and craftsmanship was king. While the Safavid Empire might have crumbled, its carpets remain vibrant, a legacy interwoven into the fabric of our cultural consciousness. And there you have it, the enduring appeal of Safavid carpets, a story that's as rich and layered as the textiles themselves. Walt Whitman's journey begins not with a grand flourish, but in the bustling chaos of early 19th century New York. Born in 1819, he entered a world that was anything but serene. Streets teemed with horses, carts, and people, all swirling like a human cyclone in a city that was growing faster than a teenager on a fast-food diet. The Whitman family, far from the elite, was more like the working-class heroes of a Dickens novel, minus the British accents. Walt was the second of 9 children, a number that today might make you wonder if his parents were attempting to field their own baseball team. The Whitmans lived in Brooklyn, a place that's now synonymous with hipsters and artisanal everything, but back then was a patchwork of farmland and ragged streets. Walt's father, Walter Whitman Sr., was a jack of all trades and a master of few. He tried his hand at carpentry, real estate speculation, and even farming, often with results that could only charitably be described as mixed. The economic landscape was no land of milk and honey either. The Panic of 1837, a financial crisis that makes modern recessions look like minor inconveniences, left many families, including the Whitmans, scrambling for stability. As a kid, Walt was not exactly the poster child for a future literary giant. He was more of a kid-next-door type, attending public school sporadically until the age of 11. Due to economic pressures, his formal education was cut short, but don't think for a second that meant he stopped learning. Oh no, young Walt was a sponge for knowledge, drinking in the world around him with the enthusiasm of a caffeine-deprived office worker on a Monday morning. At the tender age of 12, Walt became a printer's devil, which sounds far more sinister than it was. Essentially, he was an apprentice in a printing shop, a gig that offered him an up-close view of the written word. This wasn't just any printer's shop, mind you, it was the equivalent of a modern-day internship at a tech startup. Here, amid the clatter of presses and the smell of ink, Whitman got his first taste of the power of publishing. Now, let's take a moment to address the myth of the self-made man, a narrative as American as apple pie and just as full of hot air. The idea that Walt Whitman simply pulled himself up by his bootstraps is about as realistic as a unicorn winning the Kentucky Derby. Yes, Whitman worked hard, but he was also shaped by the people and circumstances around him. His time as a printer's apprentice immersed him in a world of ideas, and the bustling city provided a real-world education money couldn't buy. By the time he hit his late teenage years, Whitman was ready to spread his wings, or at least move on from the printing press. He started working as a journalist, jumping from one publication to another like a frog in a lily pond. It was a time of penny presses, where newspapers sold for, you guessed it, a penny. These papers were the Twitter of their day, fast, often sensational, and consumed voraciously by a public hungry for information and entertainment. Whitman, with his penchant for the written word, found himself drawn to this chaotic world of journalism. He wrote for several papers, including the Long Island Star and the Brooklyn Eagle. In these roles, he covered everything from local politics to social issues, sharpening his pen and his wit. The job wasn't glamorous, nor did it pay well. Most journalists at the time earned a meagre living, and Whitman was no exception. He wasn't exactly rolling in dough, more like rolling in pocket change. But here's the thing. All these experiences were like ingredients in a stew, simmering and blending to create something new. Whitman's work as a journalist honed his observational skills and his ability to capture the essence of American life in words. It taught him the power of storytelling, the importance of engaging an audience, and the beauty of the everyday. So, was Walt Whitman a self-made man? Not quite. He was more like a product of his environment, a reflection of the bustling, chaotic world around him. His early years in New York City were not just a backdrop but a crucible, forging the foundations of a poetic voice that would one day resonate far beyond the city's crowded streets. In the end, Whitman's story is not about solitary genius, but about how a young man from a humble background absorbed the vibrant life of a city and transformed it into art. And so, just like that, we find ourselves at the threshold of Walt Whitman's most audacious endeavor, the creation of Leaves of Grass. Now, if you're picturing a quaint little book of poetry gently placed on a dusty shelf, think again. What Whitman unleashed upon the world in 1855 was no mere collection of poems, it was a literary Molotov cocktail. The first edition of Leaves of Grass Carr was a slender volume, a mere 95 pages, but it packed a punch harder than a heavyweight champion. Whitman had the audacity to not only pen but also publish this work himself. That's right, self-publishing in the 19th century. Today, anyone with an internet connection can release their magnum opus with a few clicks. But back then, Whitman was swimming upstream against a current of skepticism and financial constraints. Let's talk money because, as they say, cash rules everything around us, even in the world of poetry. Whitman wasn't exactly flushed with funds. In fact, he cobbled together enough cash to print the first edition by scraping the bottom of his financial barrel. The cost? Approximately $200, which might not sound like much until you consider that this was the 1850s. To put it in perspective, that's about $6,000 in today's money. A hefty sum for a man who wasn't exactly living the high life. Whitman's decision to self-publish was more than a financial gamble. It was a declaration of independence from the literary establishment, a system that seemed about as welcoming as a porcupine's embrace. The poetic conventions of the time were neat and tidy, favoring structured verse and predictable rhymes. But Whitman? He tore up the rulebook and set it on fire. His free verse was as wild and untamed as the American frontier, a bold experiment in form and language that left many scratching their heads. Now let's be clear, Whitman's free verse wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a statement. He wanted to capture the raw, unfiltered essence of America, a nation in the throes of expansion and reinvention. His poetry was a reflection of the chaotic, electric world he inhabited. There were no constraints, no limitations, just an open road of possibility stretching out before him. But while Whitman might have been riding high on his creative wave, not everyone was ready to join the party. The reception to Sea Leaves of Grass was, shall we say, mixed. Some critics were scandalized by Whitman's bold themes and unorthodox style. They called it obscene, shocking, and too raw for public consumption. One critic even suggested that Whitman's work was best left to the readers of the police gazettes, a backhanded compliment if ever there was one. Yet, among the chorus of naysayers, there was one voice that stood out, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson, a titan of American literature and philosophy, saw in Whitman a kindred spirit. In a letter that has since become the stuff of legend, Emerson hailed Leaves of Grass as the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. It's the kind of endorsement that would make any writer break into a happy dance. Emerson's praise was more than just a pat on the back. It was a lifeline. It validated Whitman's efforts and gave him the confidence to continue his literary journey. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. While Emerson's endorsement was a feather in Whitman's cap, it didn't exactly translate into a windfall of riches or instant fame. The literary world was still deeply divided, and many remained skeptical of Whitman's radical vision. Despite the mixed reviews, Whitman was undeterred. He continued to revise and expand Leaves of Grass throughout his life, adding new poems and refining old ones. By the time of his death in 1892, the book had grown from its modest beginnings to a sprawling collection of nearly 400 poems, a testament to Whitman's relentless pursuit of artistic expression. So, what do we make of the legend of Walt Whitman? Was he a misunderstood genius ahead of his time, or just a man stubbornly marching to the beat of his own drum? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Whitman was both a dreamer and a doer, a man with the guts to follow his vision no matter the cost. And while the world may not have immediately recognized his brilliance, history has been far kinder. Today, Leaves of Grass is celebrated as a cornerstone of American literature, a work that continues to inspire and challenge readers with its bold, unyielding voice. In the end, Whitman's story is not just about poetry, it's about the courage to defy convention and the resilience to keep going even when the odds are stacked against you. It's a reminder that art, like life, is messy, unpredictable, and full of surprises. And isn't that what makes it all worth it? Whitman's story is not just about poetry, it's also about the courage to defy convention and the resilience to keep going even when the odds are stacked against you. It's a reminder that art, like life, is messy, unpredictable, and full of surprises. And isn't that what makes it all worth it? As we turn the page to another chapter in Whitman's life, we find ourselves in the midst of the American Civil War, a time when the country seemed to be tearing at the seams, much like the pages of a well-worn book. Now, the Civil War wasn't exactly a time for poetic musings, unless your idea of inspiration involves cannonballs and bayonets. For Whitman, the war was a pivotal moment. He wasn't on the front lines wielding a musket. No, Whitman took on a different kind of battlefield role. In 1862, he made his way to Washington, D.C., not as a soldier, but as a wound dresser. Picture it. A poet amidst the chaos, tending to the wounded and the dying, offering comfort where he could. This was no romanticized heroism with gallant charges into battle. It was gritty, grim, and gut-wrenching. The realities Whitman faced were far from the patriotic gloss we've all been fed in history books. Hospitals were more like scenes from a horror show, overcrowded, undersupplied, and overwhelmed. Disease was rampant, infection was a constant threat, and the stench alone could knock you out faster than any Confederate cannon. Whitman, with his knack for observation, took it all in, recording the harrowing details in his notebooks. He described the endless rows of young men, many missing limbs, many more missing hope. It was a stark reminder that war's true cost was paid in human lives, not just in grand speeches or victories on the battlefield. In his collection, Drum Tapsy, Whitman poured his wartime experiences into verse. Here was a poet not glorifying war, but laying bare its brutal truths. His poems captured the sorrow and the suffering, the camaraderie and the courage. They were a testament to the human spirit's resilience, even in the face of unimaginable horror. And while Drum Tap Cell might not have topped bestseller lists, its impact was profound, offering a raw, unfiltered look at the war's human toll. Now, if you're thinking that serving as a wound dresser was all doom and gloom, think again. Whitman found moments of connection and grace amid the chaos. He wrote letters for soldiers who couldn't, shared stories, and offered what little solace he could. It was in these small acts of kindness that Whitman found a semblance of purpose, a way to contribute beyond the written word. And let's be real, for a man who once self-published his own book, this was another way to defy the status quo. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about a certain tall, bearded man who was steering the nation through its darkest days. Yes, we're talking about Abraham Lincoln. Now, there's a persistent myth that Whitman and Lincoln were best buds, sharing deep conversations over coffee and politics. The truth? Well, it's a little less cinematic. Whitman and Lincoln did cross paths in Washington, but their interactions were more like ships passing in the night. A respectful nod here, a chance encounter there. Whitman admired Lincoln deeply, seeing in him a kindred spirit of sorts. Lincoln, with his folksy wisdom and towering presence, struck a chord with Whitman. In fact, the poet would often catch glimpses of Lincoln riding by on horseback, a solitary figure bearing the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Whitman saw the humanity in Lincoln, the struggle and the resolve, and it inspired him to pen some of his most famous works. After Lincoln's assassination in 1865, Whitman channeled his grief into one of his most iconic poems, "O Captain." "My Captain!" Here was a piece that captured the nation's collective sorrow, a lament for a leader lost too soon. It was a poem that resonated far beyond the literary circles, striking a chord with a country in mourning. Yet, even in its heartfelt tribute, Whitman managed to avoid turning Lincoln into a mythic figure. He celebrated the man, not the legend, reminding us that even heroes have their flaws. If there's one takeaway from Whitman's Civil War years, it's this. He was a man who embraced the messy, complicated reality of human existence. He didn't shy away from the darkness, nor did he sugarcoat the suffering. Instead, he held up a mirror to the world, reflecting both its beauty and its brutality. And in doing so, he gave us a body of work that continues to challenge and inspire, a legacy that transcends the pages of history. As we leave the battlefields behind and look toward the twilight of Whitman's life, we're left with a portrait of a man who lived not by conviction, but by conviction. He was a poet who dared to dream and dared to see the world as it was, not as he wished it to be. And while the path he walked was far from easy, it was one paved with purpose, passion, and the occasional poetic flourish. So, stay tuned, because Whitman's story isn't over yet. There's more to explore, more to unravel, and more to celebrate in the life of this remarkable American voice. As Whitman trod into the shadowy corridors of his later years, he found himself grappling with problems that no amount of lyrical prowess could solve. Health that was more precarious than a tightrope walker with vertigo, and finances that were as reliable as a politician's promise. Ah, the myth of the carefree bohemian poet. It's as appealing as a frothy cappuccino on a Monday morning, but the reality was a bitter brew indeed. Let's start with the health issues, because life, unlike poetry, isn't always neatly structured. By the late 1860s, Whitman's robust constitution had taken a hit. He suffered a series of strokes that left him partially paralyzed and weakened, transforming his once vigorous presence into a shadow of its former self. Imagine going from bounding upstairs 2 at a time to struggling with the simple act of dressing. Whitman, ever the observer, documented his own decline with the same unflinching honesty he applied to everything else. Amidst this personal turmoil, Whitman was also wrestling with the green-eyed monster of financial instability. You see, the image of the poet living in blissful, penurious creativity is as enduring as it is misleading. Whitman, much like the rest of us, had bills to pay. His poetic endeavours, while monumental in their cultural impact, were not exactly filling his coffers. By the 1870s, he was living with his brother George in Camden, New Jersey, and even that modest abode was a far cry from the bohemian rhapsody one might expect. It was less artist's garret and more struggling writer's refuge. Whitman attempted to secure government employment, an endeavour that was less about ambition and more about necessity. He landed a job in the Department of the Interior, a role that might sound prestigious until you realize it was about as glamorous as being the assistant manager at a discount store. Unfortunately, and with typical Whitman-esque irony, his post was short-lived. The Secretary of the Interior, James Harlan, discovered Whitman was the author of Leaves of Grass, a book he deemed too scandalous for government association, and promptly gave him the boot. Talk about being fired for artistic integrity. Undeterred and needing a paycheck, Whitman found a position as a clerk in the Attorney General's office, where he worked until 1873. His salary? A whopping $1,200 a year, which, adjusting for inflation, would be about $30,000 today. Hardly the kind of sum that allows for lavish living, but enough to keep the wolves from the door, albeit barely. Now, let's talk about legacy, because while Whitman might have been struggling to make ends meet, he was also acutely aware of the mark he wanted to leave on the world. Whitman's opus, Leaves of Grass, was more than just a book. It was his magnum opus, his declaration of independence from the staid conventions of the literary establishment, and, like any good artist, he was never quite finished with it. Revision was his constant companion, and he returned to the text again and again, adding, subtracting, and reshaping it like a sculptor, endlessly refining his masterpiece. By the time the 1881 edition rolled around, Leaves of Grass had ballooned to nearly 400 poems. Whitman's revisions were not just cosmetic, they were existential. Each adjustment was a reflection of his evolving worldview, a testament to his refusal to let his work become static. It was a living document, as dynamic and unpredictable as the man himself. But here's the kicker. Each new edition was also a financial gamble. Publishing wasn't cheap, and Whitman, ever the daring entrepreneur, often footed the bill himself. The 1881 edition was published by James R. Osgood and Company, but it wasn't long before controversy reared its head again. The Boston District Attorney threatened legal action over the book's obscene content, leading Osgood to back out. Undeterred, Whitman found another publisher, and the book continued its journey, much like its creator, resilient and relentless. As Whitman worked tirelessly to secure his literary legacy, he was also grappling with the grim realities of aging. In 1884 he purchased a modest house in Camden for $750, a sum gathered with the help of friends and admirers. The home was his sanctuary, a place where he could continue his work and welcome visitors from all walks of life. It was here that Whitman spent the remainder of his days, surrounded by books, papers, and the memories of a life lived in pursuit of truth and beauty. In these later years, Whitman became something of a living legend, an elder statesman of American letters, dispensing wisdom and wit to those who sought him out. But let's not romanticize it too much. His health continued to deteriorate, and he was often bedridden, relying on the kindness of friends and caregivers. It was a humbling existence, far removed from the vitality of his youth, yet he faced it with the same unyielding spirit that had defined his life. As we pause at this juncture in Whitman's story, let's reflect on the dichotomy of his later years, a man who was both revered and struggling, a poet whose legacy was secure even as he fought for daily survival. The image of the carefree bohemian poet dissolves under scrutiny, revealing a complex, resilient individual who navigated life's challenges with as much grace as he could muster. Stay tuned, because there's still more to unravel in the life of Walt Whitman, a life as layered and enigmatic as the verses he penned. As we traverse the twilight of Walt Whitman's life, let's sift through the myths and realities of this poetic titan, because, believe me, the truth is often stranger than fiction. Whitman, the man who practically invented the concept of the American bard, left a legacy as tangled as his famously unkempt beard. His Leaves of Grass was not merely a book. It was a cultural earthquake that shook the foundations of American literature, leaving reverberations that are still felt today. Now, let's get one thing straight. Whitman didn't exactly become a household name overnight. If anything, his rise to literary prominence was more of a slow burn than a fireworks display. In the latter part of the 19th century, America was a nation in flux, grappling with the aftermath of the Civil War and the Industrial Revolution's relentless march. Whitman, in his own way, captured this chaos and offered a voice to the voiceless, penning verses that celebrated the mundane and the monumental with equal fervor. Whitman's impact wasn't just literary, it was cultural. He was a forerunner of the free-spirited, boundary-pushing artist, a precursor to the Beats, those scrappy mid-20th century poets who took his free verse and ran with it like they were stealing second base. Ginsberg, Kerouac, and their ilk saw in Whitman a kindred spirit, a rebel who dared to defy the status quo with every line he wrote. In a way, Whitman was the original counterculture icon, a man who saw the world as it was and dared to imagine what it could be. But let's not get swept away by the romanticized image of Whitman as a lone wolf poet howling into the American wilderness. Reality, as always, is a little less glamorous. By the time Whitman was crafting his legacy, he was grappling with a society that was as divided as it was dynamic. The notion of an inclusive, democratic America was more ideal than reality, and Whitman was acutely aware of the gap between the nation's lofty ideals and its gritty realities. His poetry was both a celebration and a critique, a love letter to a nation that was as flawed as it was fascinating. Yet, for all his cultural clout, Whitman's financial situation never quite reflected his cultural significance. His poetry didn't exactly pay the bills, and he spent much of his life teetering on the brink of financial ruin. This is where the myth of the starving artist meets the harsh truth of economic survival. Whitman wasn't living in a bohemian paradise. He was often just scraping by, a fact that adds a gritty layer to the romantic image of the carefree poet. Now, let's delve into the myth versus reality conundrum, because Whitman's life is a veritable case study in this dichotomy. The myth paints him as the quintessential American sage, the wise, bearded oracle who spoke truths that resonated through the ages. But the reality? Whitman was more like a scrappy underdog, a man who faced rejection, criticism, and financial hardship with a resilience that would make Rocky Balboa proud. Whitman's sexuality is another area where myth and reality collide. Often hailed as a champion of love in all its forms, Whitman's personal life was shrouded in ambiguity and speculation. His poems, with their open celebration of the male form and camaraderie, have fueled endless debates about his sexuality. Was he gay? Bisexual? The truth is, we don't have a definitive answer, and maybe that's the point. Whitman's work transcends labels, exploring the complexities of human relationships in a way that defies easy categorization. As we contemplate Whitman's enduring legacy, let's acknowledge the irony of his posthumous fame. During his lifetime, he was more of a cult figure than a mainstream success. It wasn't until after his death in 1892 that Whitman truly entered the pantheon of American literary greats. His poems, once dismissed as obscene or overly sentimental, gradually gained recognition for their groundbreaking style and universal themes. Today, Leaves of Grass is a staple in classrooms, a rite of passage for aspiring poets, and a testament to the enduring power of words. Whitman's influence extends beyond the literary world, seeping into the cultural fabric of America like ink into a page. His vision of America as a land of diversity and possibility continues to resonate, a reminder of both the nation's promise and its challenges. In a world that is often divided, Whitman's poetry offers a unifying vision, a call to embrace the messiness of human existence with open arms and an open heart. So, what do we make of Walt Whitman, the man, the myth, the legend? He was a dreamer and a doer, a poet who dared to capture the soul of America in all its flawed glory. His life was a testament to resilience, a reminder that the path to greatness is often paved with obstacles. And while his story is firmly rooted in the 19th century, its lessons are timeless, an invitation to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. In the end, Whitman's legacy is more than just words on a page. It's an enduring testament to the power of art to transcend boundaries, challenge norms, and inspire generations. Whether you see him as a literary revolutionary or a poetic pioneer, one thing is clear. Walt Whitman's voice, with all its raw, unfiltered power, continues to echo through the corridors of history, inviting us to listen, to learn, and to dream. And isn't that the true measure of a legacy? If you ever thought math was a drag in high school, consider the Babylonians. They were doing algebra before algebra was cool, and they did it in base 60. That's right, while we're over here muddling through base 10, the Babylonians were counting like they were constructing a serious board game. Now, why base 60, you ask? Well, it's got more factors than a conspiracy theory forum divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's like the Swiss Army knife of number systems. And it's the reason our clocks and circles still bow to 60. These ancient math whizzes were doing more than just counting sheep or tallying barley. In fact, they were practically the human equivalent of a modern calculator, churning out calculations that would make even Newton do a double take. Picture this. Around 2000 BC, in the bustling city of Babylon, scribes were scribbling on clay tablets, solving quadratic equations and handling fractions with finesse. They had a knack for precision, which was pretty handy when your local economy was as complex as a soap opera plot. The Babylonians didn't just pull this number system out of thin air, it was born from necessity. Imagine a world where trade routes crisscrossed like a spaghetti junction, and you needed to keep track of goods, taxes, and debts. Enter mathematics, the great equalizer. The Babylonians used their sexagesimal system to manage everything from land distribution to astronomical calculations. And here's the kicker. They didn't have the luxury of erasers or CTRL plus Z. Mistakes were not an option when you were etching your sums into clay. Now let's debunk a myth. Ancient math wasn't just a tool for counting cows or building ziggurats. The Babylonians were astronomers, using their math skills to predict lunar eclipses and celestial events with an accuracy that would shame most horoscopes today. They tracked the movements of Venus with such precision that you'd think they were running a celestial betting pool. This was no simple stargazing, it was data-driven and systematic, an ancient precursor to modern-day science. But before we wax too poetic about these ancient number crunchers, let's talk about fractions. Remember those pesky little things from school? The Babylonians handled them like pros, using unit fractions. They didn't have handy-dandy decimals, but they made do with what they had, creating an entire mathematical system that could rival our own. They could divide and conquer with fractions like it was nobody's business. And here's the thing, they didn't just stop at numbers. The Babylonians were also pioneers in geometry, solving problems that wouldn't look out of place in a modern textbook. Forget about Pythagoras. The Babylonians were already hip to the hypotenuse centuries before he got the memo. They had a tablet, known as Plimpton 32, that listed Pythagorean triples, and it's dated around 1800 BC. Take that, Greek philosophers. So why does all this matter? Because it shows us that the Babylonians weren't just a bunch of guys in robes counting grain, they were the original mathletes, laying down the groundwork for future generations. Their ability to manipulate numbers was not only revolutionary for their time, but remains foundational to our own mathematical understanding. In essence, the Babylonians turned what could have been a dull task of counting sheep into an art form. They were the Einsteins of the ancient world, and their numerical legacy lives on every time you glance at a clock or measure an angle. So next time you're struggling with math, just remember you've got the Babylonians to thank for paving the way. And maybe, just maybe, you can channel a bit of their ancient genius to help you through your own numerical nightmares. And speaking of numerical nightmares, let's dive into how the Babylonians spun their mathematical magic to keep their sprawling urban playground up and running. You see, Babylon wasn't just a city, it was a buzzing economic hive, with more going on than a Black Friday sale. Land measurement and taxation were the bread and butter of Babylonian administration, and the scribes who handled these tasks were the unsung heroes of the ancient world. Forget the idea of dusty old men with abacuses. These number crunchers were more like the Silicon Valley gurus of their day, armed with a stylus and some serious clay tablet skills. First up, land measurement. Imagine trying to manage property disputes without Google Maps or even a decent tape measure. The Babylonians didn't have the luxury of satellite imagery, so they had to get creative. They used a system of units derived from the human body, cubits, rods, and whatnot, because when in doubt, measure with what you've got, right? But their ingenuity didn't stop there. They calculated areas of fields with a method that would make your geometry teacher proud, using formulas to determine the area of irregular plots of land. It wasn't just about square footage. It was about maximizing yield and ensuring that every inch of arable land was put to good use. Now, it might sound like they were just measuring for the sake of it, but in Babylon, land was power. Ownership and taxation were intertwined, like a pair of ancient lovers in a tragic epic. The scribes had the unenviable task of determining how much each plot was worth and how much tax should be levied. And here's where it gets juicy. Taxes weren't just about money. Babylonian taxes could be paid in grain, livestock, or even labor. So, If you were short on silver, you could always pay your dues with a few bushels of barley or some honest-to-goodness sweat equity. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't some idyllic, tax-free utopia. The taxes were high enough to make a modern taxpayer wince, and dodging them wasn't an option unless you fancied a stint working on a royal construction project. The Babylonians were serious about their tax collection, and for good reason. The revenue funded everything from massive building projects to the defense of the city. Maintaining those iconic ziggurats and keeping the Babylonian economy from imploding required a steady influx of resources, and taxes were the lifeblood of the state. So, how did they keep track of all this? Enter the humble clay tablet, the ancient equivalent of an Excel spreadsheet. These tablets were meticulously inscribed with all the necessary data names, numbers, and details of transactions. It was a bureaucrat's dream and a taxpayer's nightmare. But the system worked, and it kept Babylon ticking along like the well-oiled machine it was. Each transaction was a testament to the might of mathematics, proving that numbers were as much a part of Babylon's foundation as the bricks in its city walls. And while we're on the subject of bricks, let's not forget about volume calculation. The Babylonians were masters of three-dimensional thinking long before the term 3D was a glint in an inventor's eye. They could calculate the volume of bricks and other construction materials with startling accuracy, which was crucial when you're building giant temples or palaces that needed to stand the test of time and the occasional flood. They didn't have the convenience of a Home Depot run or error margins. Precision was key, and they delivered in spades. It's easy to romanticize this era as one of unending progress and enlightenment, but the truth is, life in Babylon came with its own set of challenges. The city's prosperity was built on a delicate balance of trade, agriculture, and administration. The Babylonians were constantly negotiating with neighboring states, dealing with the whims of the Euphrates floodwaters, and managing an ever-growing population. Mathematics was their secret weapon, their way of imposing order on chaos, and it worked wonders. In essence, the Babylonians were mathematicians not just for the love of numbers, but because their society depended on it. Their ability to convert abstract formulas into practical solutions was nothing short of genius, allowing them to create one of history's first urban civilizations. They set the stage for the administrative systems we take for granted today. An impressive feat for a bunch of ancient scribes with clay tablets and styluses. So next time you grumble about your taxes or try to figure out your mortgage payments, spare a thought for the Babylonians. They laid the groundwork for our modern financial systems without the help of calculators, internet banking, or even the concept of zero. It's a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and the surprising ways in which math continues to shape our lives, even if we sometimes wish it wouldn't. And as we continue to unpack the legacy of these ancient number wizards, remember, behind every great civilization is an even greater mathematician with a knack for turning numbers into history. Now, let's dive into the world of geometry, where the Babylonians really flexed their intellectual muscles. If you've ever cursed the existence of trigonometry, just know the Babylonians were knee-deep in it long before it became the bane of high school students everywhere. They were doing math that would leave even a modern engineer impressed, all while wearing sandals and managing a bustling empire. Forget about mere arithmetic, we're talking complex geometric calculations that would make Euclid sit up and take notice. The Babylonians had a knack for turning the abstract into the practical. For them, geometry wasn't just about drawing pretty shapes, it was the key to building their world. Think about the iconic ziggurats, those massive, multi-tiered structures that dominated the skyline of ancient Mesopotamia. Each of those architectural marvels was a testament to Babylonian mathematical prowess. They weren't just stacking bricks willy-nilly. They had precise measurements and angles that would ensure these structures stood tall and strong, defying time and gravity. These ancient architects used geometry to solve real-world problems, like figuring out how to construct a straight wall on an irregular plot of land, or ensuring that a ziggurat steps were evenly spaced. They even calculated the slopes of their structures with such precision that you might think they had access to modern surveying equipment. In reality, all they had were their wits, a few rudimentary tools, and the wisdom stored on clay tablets. And let's not forget about the role of geometry in agriculture, the lifeblood of Babylonian society. With the Euphrates and Tigris rivers providing a double-edged sword of fertility and flooding, the Babylonians had to be masters at managing water. They calculated the optimal angles for canals, ensuring that water flowed efficiently to irrigate their crops. Talk about practical math applications. These calculations were the difference between a bountiful harvest and a famine. Speaking of agriculture, the Babylonians' expertise wasn't just in growing crops. They were also adept at measuring them. When it came to managing agricultural yields, they used geometry to divide land into precise plots. This was vital for taxation and distribution, ensuring that every farmer got their fair share, or at least what the state decided was fair. This was no small feat in a society where the land was as valuable as gold. Their understanding of geometry extended to the celestial realm as well. The Babylonians were avid astronomers, using their geometric insights to track the movements of stars and planets. This wasn't just idle stargazing. They used these observations to create calendars and predict celestial events. Their lunar calendar, based on the moon's phases, was a masterpiece of mathematical ingenuity, allowing them to plan agricultural activities and religious festivals with uncanny precision. In the social sphere, mathematics was the great unifier. It brought together scribes, farmers, and artisans in a shared understanding of how to build and sustain a civilization. The Babylonians' ability to apply mathematical concepts to everyday life was nothing short of revolutionary, setting them apart as one of the most advanced societies of their time. They were the original STEM champions, proving that math and science were the backbone of a thriving society. Of course, we can't paint too rosy a picture without acknowledging the darker side of all this mathematical brilliance. The Babylonians weren't solving equations for the joy of it, they were doing it because their survival depended on it. This was a society where the wrong calculation could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. Geometry wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a matter of life and death. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the notion that the Babylonians were merely the precursors to Greek mathematicians. In reality, they were trailblazers in their own right. Long before Pythagoras was a twinkle in his philosopher parents' eyes, the Babylonians had already cracked the code of right-angled triangles. Their work laid the groundwork for future mathematical developments, proving that the ancients were capable of astonishing intellectual feats. So, next time you find yourself grappling with geometry, remember the Babylonians. They turned a seemingly abstract discipline into a tool for transforming their world. Their legacy is a reminder that math is more than just numbers on a page. It's a language that can shape societies, solve problems, and build civilizations. As we delve further into the story of these ancient number masters, keep in mind that behind every equation is a tale of human ingenuity, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Now, let's dive into the educational cauldron that brewed these Babylonian brainiacs. Forget the image of a one-room schoolhouse with a stern teacher wielding a ruler. Babylonian education was a whole different beast. Picture young scribes hunched over clay tablets, learning to etch cuneiform with a stylus in hand. No pencils, no paper, and certainly no scantrons. This was hands-on learning in the literal sense. If you made a mistake, you didn't just erase it, you hoped the clay was still malleable enough to fix your mess. Back in Babylon, education wasn't a right, it was a privilege, and a pretty exclusive one at that. We're talking about an elite club where membership was often determined by your family's standing in society. If you were born into the right household, congratulations. You had a chance to join the ranks of scribes, the intellectual powerhouses behind Babylon's administrative and economic machinery. If not, well, you might find yourself hauling bricks instead of calculating their volume. The scribal schools, known as edubas, were the Ivy Leagues of ancient Mesopotamia. These were institutions where the curriculum was as rigorous as it was specialized. Students didn't just learn to write, they mastered mathematics, law, and astronomy. Think of them as the original STEM schools, minus the fancy laboratories. The training was intense, with young scribes spending years perfecting their craft. It was a bit like boot camp, but with more mud and fewer push-ups. And what did this education buy you? For starters, it granted access to the corridors of power. Scribes were the data analysts of their time, the ones who kept the wheels of the economy turning and the stars accounted for. They were the trusted advisors to kings, the keepers of knowledge, and the enforcers of law. Their ability to read, write, and calculate was a ticket to a life of influence, one that was often out of reach for the average Babylonian farmer knee-deep in barley. The economic value of this education was immense. Scribes were the backbone of the Babylonian bureaucracy, ensuring that the economy ran smoother than a well-oiled chariot. They recorded transactions, managed taxes, and even dabbled in a bit of legal arbitration. Think of them as the original accountants and lawyers, only with a much more complex dress code involving linen and sandals. But while the scribes were busy crunching numbers and making society tick, what about everyone else? Education, in this context, was a tool of social stratification. It reinforced the divide between the haves and the have-nots, a divide as wide as the Euphrates at flood stage. The system ensured that power remained concentrated in the hands of those who could afford it, both literally and figuratively. It's a tale as old as time, knowledge is power, and those who wield it often write the rules. Now, before we start vilifying the Babylonians for their elitist tendencies, let's give credit where credit's due. Their educational methods, though exclusive, were remarkably effective. The focus was on practical skills and knowledge that could be directly applied to the needs of the state. It was education with a purpose, tailored to produce individuals who could contribute to the functioning of society. There was no time for fluff or electives on Babylonian basket weaving. This was serious business. Contrast that with our modern educational system, where students often find themselves drowning in a sea of standardized tests and multiple-choice questions. The Babylonians would likely find our methods baffling, with their emphasis on rote memorization rather than critical thinking and problem-solving. In Babylon, learning was an immersive experience, one that required students to engage directly with the material and understand its real-world applications. And yet, despite the exclusivity, the Babylonian model offers lessons we could still learn from today. Their approach was all about mastery, ensuring that students truly understood their subject matter before moving on. There was no passing the buck or inflating grades to preserve self-esteem. It was about earning your stripes, one painstakingly inscribed tablet at a time. As we ponder the legacy of Babylonian education, it's worth asking, have we lost something in the translation from clay tablets to tablets made by Apple? In our quest for efficiency and scalability, have we sacrificed depth and understanding? The Babylonians might argue that true education is not about churning out graduates with a piece of paper, but about creating thinkers who can navigate the complexities of their world. But let's not get too carried away romanticizing the past. The reality is, Babylonian education was a product of its time, shaped by the economic and social needs of its society. It was a system that worked for those within it, but left many on the outside looking in. A reminder that progress often comes with its own set of challenges. As we continue to unravel the story of these ancient scribes and their formidable legacy, let's keep in mind the lessons they offer us. Behind every clay tablet lies a story of human ambition and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. And while we may not be inscribing our homework into wet clay, the spirit of Babylonian learning endures in every equation solved, every law written, and every star charted. As we prepare to explore the final chapters of this ancient narrative, remember, the past is not just a place we come from, it's a guide to where we might go. So, as we prepare to unravel the final chapters of this ancient narrative, let's dive into the enduring legacy of Babylonian mathematics. Picture the Greeks, those toga-wearing thinkers we often credit with birthing Western mathematics as intellectual magpies. They didn't just invent ideas out of thin air, they borrowed, refined, and occasionally swiped concepts from their ancient neighbours. And who could blame them? Babylonian math was the intellectual equivalent of a treasure trove. By the time Pythagoras started pondering his famous theorem around the 6th century BCE, Babylonian mathematicians had already cracked the right-angled triangle puzzle nearly a millennium earlier. Plimpton 32-2, a 3,800-year-old clay tablet, is a who's who of Pythagorean triples. Imagine Pythagoras wide-eyed as he perused these ancient scribes' handiwork. It's a bit like finding your grandmother's secret recipe book, only to realize she invented cupcakes before they were a thing. But the Greeks weren't just passive recipients. They took Babylonian knowledge and ran with it, adding their flair. Euclid, often dubbed the father of geometry, stood on the shoulders of Babylonian giants. He systematized their fragmented insights into a cohesive framework that influenced everything from Renaissance art to modern engineering. So next time you hear a Greek mathematician getting all the credit, remember they had a little help from their Babylonian friends. Now, let's tackle the myth of Western mathematical superiority. It's a comfy little narrative that paints Western civilization as the sole torchbearer of progress. But history, ever the inconvenient truth-teller, begs to differ. While the Greeks were busy philosophizing, ancient mathematicians across the world were scribbling down equally groundbreaking ideas. The Indians, with their love for zero and decimal points, and the Chinese, with their early algebraic equations. Everyone had a piece of the mathematical pie. The Babylonians were the original disruptors, their contributions often overshadowed by the Western-centric narrative. They were the intellectual rock stars of their time, and their mathematical riffs continue to echo through history. Their sexagesimal system, for instance, is the reason we tell time in 60-minute hours and measure angles in 360-degree circles. It's a testament to their enduring influence, proving that ancient doesn't mean obsolete. It means foundational. Let's take a moment to appreciate the economic context that propelled Babylonian mathematics. This wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a pragmatic response to the complex demands of a thriving economy. Babylon's bustling trade routes, agricultural innovations, and architectural marvels necessitated a sophisticated understanding of mathematics. Every calculation was a piece in the grand puzzle of maintaining a vibrant civilization. Their numerical precision was the glue that held the economic machine together, ensuring everything from fair taxation to effective land management. And speaking of taxation, the Babylonians were early adopters of the principle that nothing is certain except death and taxes. Their methodical record-keeping, inscribed on clay tablets, is a precursor to modern accounting. These accountants of antiquity were no mere bean counters. They were financial wizards who turned numbers into narratives that told the story of Babylon's prosperity. Fast forward a few centuries, and the echoes of Babylonian math are everywhere, in the navigation of ships, the construction of cathedrals, and the rhythm of our daily lives. The next time you check your watch, remember that those 60 minutes owe their existence to Babylonian innovation. It's a reminder that our lives are still intertwined with the ancient world, whether we realize it or not. So why does this matter today? Because the legacy of Babylonian mathematics is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless quest for knowledge. It reminds us that the path to progress is a collective journey, not the exclusive domain of any one culture or era. The Babylonians, with their clay tablets and styluses, were trailblazers in an intellectual marathon that continues to this day. In conclusion, let's reflect on the dusty clay tablets that continue to shape our lives. These ancient artifacts are more than relics. They're blueprints of human achievement. They remind us of a time when necessity fueled innovation, and when mathematics was not just a subject, but a lifeline. The Babylonians were the architects of a mathematical legacy that transcends time and geography, proving that the past is not just a place we come from, it's a guide to where we might go. So, next time you're wrestling with an equation or marveling at a starry sky, give a nod to those ancient scribes of Babylon. Their work laid the foundation for our understanding of the universe, a universe that's as mysterious and boundless as the mathematical possibilities they first explored. And remember, behind every great civilization is an even greater mathematician, etching the story of humanity one number at a time. On a sweltering summer day in 1905, Paris welcomed a squirming, cantankerous bundle of potential named Jean-Paul Sartre. Little did anyone know, this newborn would grow up to challenge traditional thought and become the poster child for existentialism, even if he spent a significant amount of his early years in a haze of rebellion and mischief. Paris was a city already bursting with ideas and contradictions, a perfect playground for a mind like Sartre's, ready to poke holes in everything from social norms to the very fabric of reality itself. Growing up, young Sartre was the kind of kid who'd rather question authority than colour within the lines. His father, Jean-Baptiste Sartre, a naval officer, passed away when Sartre was just 15 months old, leaving his mother, Anne-Marie, to raise him. And she did so in the most bookish way possible, surrounding him with literature and philosophy, perhaps hoping that some of those weighty tomes would keep him out of trouble. Spoiler alert, they didn't. By the time Sartre hit school age, he was already a pint-sized troublemaker with a penchant for the dramatic. Enrolled at the prestigious Lycée Henri IV, young Jean-Paul didn't just learn the classics, he actively challenged them. Imagine the audacity of a kid who looked at the curriculum and thought, What if everything they're teaching is nonsense? It's like questioning gravity because you tripped over your own feet. But that, in essence, was Sartre, a constant thorn in the side of convention. His time at Lycée Henry IV was marked by a series of stunts that would make a modern-day YouTuber blush. There's a legendary tale of a prank he pulled, involving a staged rebellion against the oppressive regime of school rules. While the details are fuzzy and likely exaggerated in the retelling, the point is Sartre nearly got himself expelled. Yet somehow he managed to wiggle out of serious consequences, likely by the sheer force of his argumentative prowess. This knack for debate and defiance would come in handy later, as he took on philosophers, politicians, and anyone who dared to disagree with his world view. After surviving Lycée Henry IV, Sartre made his way to the École Normale Supérieure, the breeding ground for France's brightest minds. If Lycée Henry IV was a playground, ENS was a battleground of intellects, and Sartre was ready to go to war. This was where he met Simone de Beauvoir, a fellow student and philosophical powerhouse in her own right. Their partnership would become the stuff of legends, a dynamic duo challenging gender norms, existential dread, and everything in between. Not your typical college romance, but then again nothing about Sartre was ever typical. Now, let's pause for a moment to consider the sheer improbability of two such formidable minds colliding in the same lecture halls. It's like the universe was playing matchmaker with a sense of humour. Sartre and Beauvoir weren't just partners in thought, they were co-conspirators in a philosophical revolution that would leave the academic world reeling and redefine what it meant to be an intellectual power couple. But before they could take on the world, Sartre had to survive the rigours of academic life. ENS wasn't just an ivory tower of learning, it was a crucible designed to test the mettle of its students. Sartre, never one to back down from a challenge, dove headfirst into the deep end. His early writings and debates were peppered with the same audacity that marked his pranks, questioning not just the established order, but the very nature of existence itself. Through all the bluster and bravado, however, there was a method to Sartre's madness. His early encounters with existentialist thought were like kindling to a fire, igniting a passion for understanding human freedom, responsibility, and the often absurd nature of life. While some might call it navel-gazing, Sartre saw it as a mission, a quest to peel back the layers of societal pretense and reveal the raw, unvarnished truth beneath. And yet, even as Sartre was busy rewriting the rules of philosophy, there was a distinctly human side to him that often gets overlooked. He wasn't just a brain on legs, he was a man with all the quirks and flaws that come with the territory. He had a love for jazz, a penchant for smoking like a chimney, and a writing process that could best be described as chaotic. Picture a room filled with crumpled papers and half-finished cups of espresso, and you've got a glimpse into the creative whirlwind that was Sartre's early writing career. As Sartre continued his education, his relationship with Beauvoir deepened, both intellectually and personally. They saw themselves as pioneers, not bound by the traditional expectations of marriage or monogamy. Instead, they crafted a partnership based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to exploring the big questions of life. It was unconventional, sure, but that was precisely the point. Why do things the usual way when you can forge your own path? Throughout these formative years, Sartre was laying the groundwork for the ideas that would eventually define his legacy. His philosophy was like a double espresso shot for the soul, jolting people awake to the possibilities and responsibilities of true freedom. While many of his contemporaries were content to regurgitate old ideas, Sartre was busy concocting a philosophical cocktail that was equal parts daring and disorienting. In the end, what makes Sartre's early life so fascinating isn't just the facts and figures, though they certainly add colour to the story. It's the sheer force of his personality, the relentless drive to question and redefine. Sure, he was a bit of a troublemaker, but isn't that what the world needs now and then? A little trouble to shake things up, to challenge complacency and inspire change? As we leave young Sartre poised on the brink of greatness, it's worth remembering that every giant of history started as a child with a curious mind and a rebellious spirit. The key is what they do with that spark, and Sartre, with all his quirks and contradictions, used his to light a fire under the philosophical world, a fire that still burns brightly today. Fast forward to the 1930s, and Sartre was no longer just a precocious kid causing a ruckus in the hallowed halls of academia. He was now a full-fledged intellectual firebrand, ready to set the philosophical world ablaze with ideas that would make even the most seasoned thinkers sit up and take notice. If his earlier years were the warm-up act, consider this the main event, a decade where Sartre's thoughts matured like a fine wine, only with a bit more existential angst thrown in for good measure. During this time, Sartre coined the phrase that would become his enduring legacy: existence precedes essence. Now, I know what you're thinking. What in the world does that mean? In plain English, Sartre was saying that we're not born with a predetermined purpose or blueprint. Instead, we carve out our own meaning through our actions and choices. Life isn't a pre-written script. It's more like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, where you're both the author and the protagonist. Sartre took the traditional notion of essence, our so-called inherent nature, and flipped it on its head, asserting that we exist first, and only then do we define who we are. To illustrate this, let's say you're born into a family of bakers. Traditionally, your essence would be baker in training from day one. But according to Sartre, you start off as a clean slate. You might choose to embrace the family business, or you might decide to become a rock star or a philosopher like our friend Jean-Paul. The point is, it's your call. It's a liberating concept, sure, but also a bit terrifying when you realize the responsibility that comes with it. Suddenly, there's no one else to blame for your choices, just you and the existential void. Sartre's philosophy wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a reaction to the tumultuous world around him. Pre-war France was a hotbed of political and economic upheaval, a nation grappling with the aftershocks of the Great Depression and the rise of fascism across Europe. Unemployment was rampant, and by 1932, over 400,000 Parisians were out of work. The government, swinging between left and right like a political pendulum, struggled to find its footing. It was an era of uncertainty and anxiety, the perfect breeding ground for existentialist thought. Against this backdrop, Sartre was brewing a philosophical storm. He published his first novel, Nausea, in 1938. It's a tale that dives deep into the existential crisis of Antoine Roquentin, a character who could give Hamlet a run for his money in the angst department. Through Roquentin, Sartre explored the absurdity and meaninglessness of life, a theme that resonated with a generation teetering on the edge of another world war. Now, let's shift gears to one of the most enduring myths about Sartre, his time as a prisoner of war. The story goes that during the early 1940s, Sartre was captured by German forces and held at Stalag the Twenten D, a POW camp near Trier, Germany. Legend has it that in the isolation and deprivation of the camp, Sartre penned his magnum opus, Being and Nothingness, a philosophical tome as dense as it is profound. It's a romantic image, isn't it? The solitary philosopher, scribbling away in a bleak prison cell, crafting ideas that would shake the foundations of Western thought. But let's pump the brakes on the romanticism for a moment. The reality was a bit less glamorous. Sartre was indeed captured in 1940 during the German invasion of France, but his stint as a prisoner was relatively short, less than 9 months. And while he did begin sketching out ideas that would later appear in Being and Nothingness, the bulk of the writing happened after his release. So, while the myth paints Sartre as a prisoner-turned-genius, the truth is that his genius was more of a slow burn, ignited by the experiences and freedoms of post-captivity life. Speaking of Sartre's time in captivity, it wasn't all introspection and philosophical musings. He also wrote a play, Baryona, or The Son of Thunder, for his fellow prisoners, which offered a bit of a morale boost and a distraction from the dreariness of camp life. This wasn't just a creative outlet for Sartre, it was a testament to his belief in the power of art and thought to transcend even the grimmest circumstances. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, intellectually speaking, despite the barbed wire and armed guards. Back in France, the world was changing at a breakneck pace. The political landscape was a minefield, with the Vichy government siding with Nazi Germany and the resistance gaining momentum in the shadows. It was a time when choosing sides wasn't just philosophical, it was a matter of life and death. Sartre, true to his existentialist ethos, chose to resist, albeit in his own way. He joined the intellectual resistance, using words and ideas as his weapons against oppression. The economic situation, meanwhile, was a different kind of battlefield. Rationing and shortages were the order of the day, as France struggled under the weight of occupation. Breadlines became a common sight, and everyday necessities were often out of reach for the average citizen. It was a stark reminder of the precariousness of existence, a theme Sartre would continue to explore in his work. In a world where the future was anything but certain, the power of personal choice became all the more crucial. As the 1930s drew to a close, Sartre was on the cusp of his most prolific period. His ideas were gaining traction, not just in academic circles, but among a public hungry for new ways of understanding a world that seemed to be unraveling. There was a certain irony in Sartre's rise to prominence during such a chaotic time. In a world where nothing seemed to make sense, his philosophy of radical freedom and responsibility offered both a lifeline and a challenge. It asked people to confront the chaos head-on and to find meaning not in some predetermined destiny, but in the choices they made every day. So, as we leave Sartre on the brink of the 1940s, it's clear that his journey was far from over. The seeds of existentialism he'd planted were beginning to take root, and the world was about to see just how revolutionary his ideas could be. Sartre was more than just a thinker. He was a catalyst for change, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit is capable of extraordinary things. And while his story is one of myth and reality, of legend and harsh truth, it's also a testament to the power of thought to shape not just individual lives, but the course of history itself. As the 1940s rolled into the post-war era, Jean-Paul Sartre found himself not just at the forefront of philosophy, but smack dab in the middle of a social and political revolution. Having survived World War II and emerged as a leading voice of existentialism, Sartre was ready to apply his radical ideas to the messy realities of a world trying to pick up the pieces. Think of it as taking existentialism from the ivory tower to the gritty streets, where the ideas of freedom and responsibility weren't just cerebral exercises, but matters of life and death. Now, let's talk about one of the most infamous moments in Sartre's life, his decision to give the Nobel Prize in Literature the cold shoulder in 1964. Yes, you heard that right. Sartre, the man who could have added 73,000 Swedish kronor, around 53,000 back then, to his wallet, decided to say thanks, but no thanks. It's like turning down a winning lottery ticket because you don't want the attention. But if you know anything about Sartre, you'll know that he was never one for the easy path. So, why snub the Nobel Prize? Sartre claimed he did not want to be institutionalized, which is a fancy way of saying he wasn't in the market for labels or accolades. He believed that accepting such an award would compromise his independence, turning him into yet another cog in the establishment machine he spent his life questioning. It's the kind of move that makes you want to roll your eyes and applaud at the same time. On one hand, you admire his principles. On the other, you wonder if he ever looked at a bank statement. The prize committee was reportedly baffled, probably sitting around a table scratching their heads and wondering if it was some kind of existential prank. But Sartre was nothing if not consistent. He'd turned down other honors before, maintaining that a writer should not become an institution. In other words, Sartre wanted to remain the philosophical rebel without a cause, refusing to be tamed by accolades. Now, leaving a small fortune on the table is one thing, but Sartre wasn't done shaking things up. Enter his foray into political activism and, shall we say, his less-than-stellar attempt at a political career. Politics, the arena where idealism goes to die. Sartre, however, charged in like a romantic knight, ready to slay the dragon of injustice. And what better way to make waves than by starting a newspaper? La Cause du Peuple was born, a publication that Sartre himself distributed on the streets of Paris, much to the bemusement of passers-by who might have wondered why this esteemed philosopher was playing paperboy. The paper was short-lived, but Sartre's commitment was nothing if not earnest. La Cause du Peuple aimed to give a voice to the workers, to challenge the status quo, and to stir the pot of French politics. Unfortunately, it quickly became a target for authorities, who didn't appreciate Sartre's brand of incendiary journalism. The paper was banned, and Sartre found himself facing legal troubles, a minor inconvenience for a man who seemed to thrive on chaos. Despite the setback, Sartre was undeterred. He continued his activism, aligning himself with various leftist movements and causes. He was the proverbial thorn in the side of the establishment, a role he seemed to relish. Sartre was like that friend who always shows up at the party with a megaphone, ready to make a scene and challenge everyone's assumptions about what a party should be. But let's not romanticize the man too much. Sartre's political endeavors were met with mixed reviews. While some hailed him as a champion of the people, others saw him as a dilettante dabbling in things he didn't fully understand. His radical ideas didn't always translate well to the messy realities of political life. In the end, Sartre was a philosopher at heart, more comfortable in the realm of ideas than the trenches of political warfare. Yet, in true Sartrean fashion, he never shied away from the contradictions. He embraced them, revelled in them even. For Sartre, life was a series of choices, each one a chance to define oneself anew. His refusal of the Nobel Prize and his foray into activism were just more expressions of that existential ethos. They were statements of autonomy, declarations of his refusal to be boxed in by societal expectations. In the broader context, Sartre's post-war activism was a reflection of the times. The world was changing, and people were questioning old structures and ideologies. Sartre was part of a larger movement, one that sought to redefine what it meant to be human in a world that had seen the depths of human depravity. His ideas resonated because they spoke to the desire for freedom in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. And so, as Sartre navigated the choppy waters of post-war life, he remained a figure of both admiration and controversy. He was a man who lived by his principles, even when they led him down paths few dared to tread. In rejecting the Nobel Prize, he wasn't just making a statement, he was living his philosophy. It was a reminder that, for Sartre, the only real prize was the freedom to think, to question, and to define his own essence. As we leave this chapter of Sartre's life, it's clear that his story is far from over. His ideas continue to challenge and inspire, a testament to the enduring power of a mind that refused to be institutionalized. So, whether you see Sartre as a visionary or a fool, one thing is certain, he was never boring. In a world that often rewards conformity, Sartre dared to be different. And that's a legacy that's difficult to ignore. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the life of a man who, in his quest for freedom, left an indelible mark on the world. So, as we wade deeper into the labyrinthine life of Jean-Paul Sartre, let's shine a spotlight on the other half of this philosophical dynamic duo, Simone de Beauvoir. It's time to peel away the layers of their much-talked-about relationship. A union as unconventional as a tuxedo at a beach party. Sartre and de Beauvoir weren't just a couple. They were a partnership in the grandest sense, a collaboration that melded minds as much as it did affections. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking this was just some romantic escapade. Their relationship was a revolution against the norms of the day, a daring experiment in living that had all the hallmarks of a philosophical thesis gone rogue. Into the 1929 meeting at the École Normale Supérieure, a setting more known for rigorous scholarship than burgeoning relationships. Sartre and de Beauvoir, two intellectual titans in the making, found a kindred spirit in each other, the kind that sparks both admiration and envy in onlookers. Their bond was cemented by an agreement of utter transparency and intellectual honesty, which, in practice, meant no secrets, no possessiveness, and definitely no monogamy. It's like they were living the 21st century open relationship, millennia before it became hashtag-worthy. But let's not romanticize this arrangement too much. The reality was that their pact required a level of emotional dexterity most mortals can only dream of. In a world where the norm was getting hitched and having 2.5 kids, Sartre and de Beauvoir wrote their own rules, refusing to be bound by societal expectations. They weren't looking for picket fences. They were building a fortress of ideas. Now, hold on to your berets because their relationship wasn't all roses and existential musings. Their letters and diaries reveal a partnership as tumultuous as it was tender. Picture this Sartre with his slightly dishevelled look, penning voluminous letters filled with intellectual musings and emotional complexities. De Beauvoir, equally verbose, matched him word for word, thought for thought. Their correspondence, often resembling a tennis match of ideas, touched on everything from love to existential dread to the minutiae of daily life. Of course, power couples are often mythologized into something larger than life, and Sartre and de Beauvoir are no exception. But not so fast. let's debunk the myth of their relationship as some idyllic intellectual paradise. Sure, they were a powerhouse of creativity and thought, inspiring each other to push boundaries, but they also had their share of disagreements and rivalries, with each pushing the other to the brink of their philosophical and emotional limits. Sartre's penchant for courting other women was both a test and testament to their unconventional bond. Meanwhile, de Beauvoir had her own dalliances, which she pursued with equal vigour. Their relationship was less a fairy tale and more a complex novel, with all the plot twists and redemptive arcs that real life rarely affords. While we're on the subject of myth-busting, let's address their much-vaunted collaborations. Sartre and de Beauvoir weren't just lovers, they were co-authors of a sort, engaging in debates that would shape their respective works. Sartre's Being and Nothingness and de Beauvoir's The Second Sex weren't just philosophical texts, they were dialogue partners in a broader conversation about freedom, gender, and existence. Yet, behind the scenes, their exchanges reveal a rivalry as heated as their cooperation was fruitful. For every philosophical tag team, there was a private bout of intellectual one-upmanship. It's like watching two chess grandmasters go head-to-head, each move calculated, each strategy loaded with subtext. Fast forward to 1968, where Sartre's influence reached a boiling point during the student protests in Paris. Picture the scene, the streets of the Latin Quarter teeming with students, their voices raised in a cacophony of dissent against the establishment. Sartre, by then a seasoned agitator, found himself amid this youthful uprising. The students saw him as a kind of intellectual godfather, a role he embraced with gusto. You see, by this time, Sartre was a political veteran, and his presence lent the protests an air of gravitas, a reminder that the fight for freedom was as much an intellectual endeavour as a physical one. But let's not get carried away with the grandeur of it all. There were moments of sheer absurdity amidst the chaos. Imagine Sartre, not a spry young man but a grizzled philosopher, navigating the barricades with the students he inspired. It's a bit like watching your grandfather trying to keep up at a rock concert. Yet his presence was more than symbolic. It was a testament to the power of ideas to ignite change. The protests weren't just about policy, they were about reimagining society, a cause Sartre had championed throughout his career. The protests of '68 were a cultural and social upheaval, challenging everything from consumerism to authoritarianism. For Sartre, this was the living embodiment of existential freedom. Choosing to define their own destinies, rejecting the predetermined roles society had carved out for them. The irony, of course, is that many of these students were rebelling against a system that had largely ignored Sartre's existential warnings about freedom and responsibility. Yet here they were, enacting the very principles he'd spent a lifetime espousing. And let's not forget the humorous moments that punctuated this period. Sartre, always one for a bit of dark comedy, couldn't help but find the irony in the situation. Here he was, a philosopher in his mid-60s, surrounded by teenagers and 20-somethings who were, in essence, giving life to his life's work. It was both a validation and a parody of his theories, a reminder that ideas, once unleashed, take on lives of their own. As we leave Sartre amidst the smoke and slogans of 1968, his legacy is still unfolding. His relationship with de Beauvoir remains a fascinating study of human connection, a testament to the power of ideas to both unite and divide. Their partnership was a complex dance of intellect and emotion, a reminder that love, like philosophy, is rarely straightforward, and while the student protests highlighted Sartre's enduring influence, they also underscored the limits of theory in the face of lived experience. Sartre's story is one of contradictions and complexities, a tapestry woven with both brilliance and blunders, a fitting legacy for a man who dared to ask the uncomfortable questions and lived with the uncomfortable answers. Stay tuned, because the final chapter of Sartre's life promises even more twists and turns in this grand existential drama. As the dust settled on the mayhem of 1968, Jean-Paul Sartre, the intellectual maverick, found himself grappling not just with the chaos of a changing world, but with his own faltering body. Age, that relentless foe, had finally caught up with him, and no amount of philosophical prowess could fend it off. By the time the 1970s rolled around, Sartre was facing a formidable adversary. His declining health, particularly his eyesight, which was deteriorating faster than the ink in his pen could dry. Yet, true to form, Sartre remained undeterred. He kept scribbling away, his passion for ideas as unyielding as ever. Let's not sugarcoat it, Sartre's health was on a downward spiral. By the late 1970s, he was practically blind, a condition exacerbated by his relentless smoking, a vice he famously indulged despite knowing its consequences. Ah, the irony of a man who preached freedom yet remained shackled to nicotine. But Sartre wasn't about to let his failing vision dim his intellectual fire. He didn't just sit around bemoaning his fate. Instead, he adapted, employing secretaries to transcribe his thoughts, ensuring that his ideas continued to flow as effortlessly as the Seine through Paris. Even in his twilight years, Sartre was a testament to the power of the mind over matter. Now, before we get too sentimental, let's debunk the romanticized image of Sartre as the quintessential tortured genius. Sure, he had his demons, who doesn't, but to paint him solely as a suffering artist would be to overlook the full spectrum of his contributions. Sartre wasn't just a philosopher brooding in a dimly lit room. He was a public intellectual, a political agitator, and a literary giant. His works, from Nausea to Being and Nothingness, challenged readers to confront the uncomfortable truths of existence. He wasn't content to simply ponder life's mysteries. He demanded that we all join him in the existential trenches. Speaking of trenches, Sartre's later years were marked by a continued commitment to political causes, even when his physical frailties made activism a Herculean task. He lent his voice to various movements, from anti-colonial struggles to workers' rights, proving that age and infirmity were no match for an indomitable spirit. Sartre's political involvement wasn't a mere footnote. It was integral to his philosophy of engagement, a belief that intellectuals had a duty to participate in the world's affairs, not just pontificate from on high. As we reflect on Sartre's legacy, let's confront the myth of the solitary genius head-on. While it's tempting to imagine Sartre as a lone wolf, prowling the intellectual wilderness, the reality is that he was deeply embedded in a network of thinkers, artists, and activists who both challenged and inspired him. Sartre's relationship with Simone de Beauvoir, for instance, was a cornerstone of his intellectual life. Their partnership wasn't just a personal affair, it was a crucible for ideas that would shape the course of 20th century thought. But what of Sartre's enduring influence? How does a philosopher known for his dense, oftentimes impenetrable prose remain relevant in a world obsessed with quick fixes and sound bites? Enter the curious phenomenon of Sartre for Dummies' books. Yes, you read that right. In a world where existentialism has been distilled into bite-sized nuggets, Sartre's thought has found new life in the most unexpected places. These simplified versions of his work serve as both an introduction to his ideas and a reminder of the complexity that lies beneath the surface. It's a testament to the enduring appeal of Sartre's philosophy that even in a digital age, people are still eager to grapple with the questions he posed. And then there's his cameo in Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, a delightful nod to Sartre's lasting impact on popular culture. Sure, it's a fictional portrayal, but it underscores a fundamental truth. Sartre's ideas have permeated the collective consciousness, influencing everything from films to fashion. The fact that he can be referenced in a Hollywood movie and still resonate with audiences speaks volumes about his lasting significance. As we bring Sartre's story to a close, let's acknowledge the paradox of his legacy. On one hand, he was a giant of philosophy, a thinker whose works continue to challenge and inspire. On the other, he was a deeply flawed individual, prone to contradictions and excesses. Yet, perhaps it's this very complexity that makes Sartre so compelling. He was a man who embraced the chaos of life, who revelled in its absurdity even as he sought to understand it. Sartre's life was a testament to the power of the human mind to transcend its limitations, to forge meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it. In the end, Sartre's story is one of resilience and rebellion, of a mind that refused to be confined by convention or circumstance. He leaves behind a legacy not just of thought, but of action, a reminder that true freedom lies not in the absence of constraints, but in the courage to confront them. And so, as we bid farewell to Jean-Paul Sartre, let's carry forward his spirit of inquiry and defiance, ever mindful that the journey of understanding is one we must all undertake, each in our own way.